Well, well, for those of you who are newcomers, this is a little different than a stock marriage conference in that I call it Marriage 2.0 because it's like intentionally deeper. I originally wrote it for professionals, and somehow it caught on at churches, but it's like more like how I really think in my practice and some of the gnarly stuff I really deal with. You can get the more lightweight stuff in the original marriage conference, but this is some of where the real rubber meets the road in my life. Y'all got a vibe last night for how like complex and sticky and deep that can get, and I was quite impressed at y'all's hanging in there with me. After I do that talk, and then I get here on Saturday morning, and it's like you come back. That's always good, you know. It's like I feel a little like a band of brothers. Like, hey, little squares, we did it last night. You know, we did it together. By the way, speaking of that, I do want to applaud you guys. I mean, as I take my own pulse and look at my own life, and I'm not even in the bottom of the U anymore, I don't know if I would come to a marriage conference at the end of my week for a Friday night and a Saturday morning. So I applaud you. Say that to your spouse on the way home today. Like, this is important enough to me to spend my Friday night and my Saturday morning doing something for us. I mean, just the fact that you're here says something so powerful about y'all's relationship. So bravo to you. Anyway, so see what I meant last night when I said this is kind of Marriage 501. Y'all remember the story from the first marriage conference? I just love it so much I got to tell it. The story about the old man at my men's prayer breakfast at my church in Jackson, Mississippi. And we had this like super egghead marriage expert-y guy come and talk for like hours about marriage this and marriage that for this men's group. And when he finally finished, and in that little, and closed in prayer, in that little silence before the chairs pushed back, this old dude in our church named Mr. Lemon, he's like old as Alabama, man, this old dude. You could hear him say, I'm just glad I got married before it got so complicated. So if you're feeling that this weekend, I feel your pain. I apologize. All right, this first talk here, I'm always excited when I get to do this talk. I love it because it's something that I deal with constantly in my office. I alluded last night that I find it to be relevant in like half of the marriages that I work with. And I've never heard anybody really speak on it and really try to unpack it. And I've never read anything about it. The closest thing that I've read about it is a book I read by a guy who is a terrorist hostage negotiator. And I'm like, he's kind of saying the same. Well, anyway, if that describes your marriage, please see me after class, okay? But it's like I said, the number one podcast by far downloaded on my podcast. I'm shocked at how much it's often the only hope. I'm really kind of stunned sometimes at the fact that it works. Every time it works, I'm like, whoa. And it takes some practice to learn the skills. But unfortunately, a lot of us live with people who give us lots of opportunities to practice. So there's that. So here goes. Last time in Marriage Conference 1, we talked about the dynamics of conflict, you know, and we talked about win-win and mutuality, and we talked about taking timeouts and kind of the basics of working on problems. But that whole talk was predicated on the assumption that both of you were repentant. In other words, that both of you were on board, that you were both in essence saying, hey, Doc, we keep fighting, help us stop. Like, how do we do that? And frankly, everything you've ever heard me talk about regarding marriage in the first conference or even last night sort of functions on the assumption that you're both sort of on board. Like, hey, last night, let's look at our little squares and figure out how our baggage, want to do that together, honey? And it kind of assumes that you're kind of on the same page. But here's the interesting question, and something I encounter constantly in the office in about half the marriages that I deal with. What about people who are jerky and like it? What about people who don't want the conflict to resolve? What about people who kind of like pushing your buttons? What about people who enjoy being in kind of a one-up, critical, kind of snarky position with you, and they're not really interested in changing that? All right? I find that to be the case in half the marriages I work with, half the marriages I encounter in churches and homes, that there's one person who's not really so repentant and open and humble. They kind of live prickly and controlling, and they like it, okay? So we're going to talk about how to deal with spouses. And the fun thing is this will apply across the board to your relationships. It'll apply to sisters or mothers or brothers or people you work with, anybody who are mean or critical or hurtful, and how to engage them. And it applies to just the rest of us when we're just being turkeys and somebody needs to set limits on us, all right? Because we're all like that at some point. So here's kind of the situations that I run into. I had this client once, and his wife was just this sort of scary, volatile person, just real type A and real driven. And she was kind of the primary breadwinner, and she would come busting in the house, and she'd hear like racket in the house. And the first thing out of her mouth is, "This is why I'm in a bad mood all the time." And the husband and the kids would like scatter, you know. They're like terrified of her. They're on eggshells. They're like, oh my gosh, you know, what's her anger going to do next? And she lived with this vibe of kind of this scary person in the house. And when the husband would try to talk to her about it, I mean, he and I were meeting. She wasn't coming to therapy. Oftentimes, as we'll get to, these people don't go to therapy. He's like, I've tried to talk to her about this. Like, babe, come on, this is like this vibe. It's like really yucky and all that. And she would just kind of go, oh my gosh, you're too sensitive. Quit making such a big deal out of everything, okay? In other words, she's kind of a bully vibe in the family, and she doesn't care, and she's not wanting to change. What do we do with these kind of people? Or the people who kind of punish you with silence? Or those people whose kind of go-to tone is that controlling sort of, you spent what? Okay? I can't believe you do something so stupid. You know, that kind of angry, in-your-face vibe, all right? Though sometimes these people have a point. There's a guy told me a while back. He said, I'm just sitting there, and all of a sudden my wife is standing over me with her hands on her hips, saying, you haven't heard a single word I've said, have you? And I thought, that's kind of a funny way to start a conversation. Yeah, okay. 1,001, 1,002, get it? All right, it's a joke. But otherwise, how do we respond to hurtful, out of control aspects of people who don't really care? And I'm not even talking like domestic violence or something, okay? It could be just that pouter or that nitpicker or that sort of selfish critic. A client of mine who had cancer recently, her mother was carrying on because my client's cancer was really invading her life, as you can expect, and it limited her. And her mother said, your cancer is not all about you, Tristan. I'm like, okay, like I get a vibe for this woman, right? All right. So everybody kind of has that person that, oh, we could never say that to them. All right. And I'm going to tell you sort of some of my theories and ideas of how I've learned to engage these people. And it works like 90% of the time. Not 100%, okay, but not 50%. It'll work 90% of the time. As I alluded last night, sometimes the best marital therapy I do is individual therapy with the spouse who will come to therapy. That's that baby mobile vibe. That's some of how we're going to deal with it. So this is deal with difficult people and with regular people when we're dealing difficult. And doing so, here's something I want to plant in your brain early. Doing so in a way that protects you, but also doing so in a way that is growth producing to them. Because what we're going to be doing is not just going to be sort of setting limits on somebody who can be painful or acerbic, but this sort of intervention, I believe, biblically speaking from a God point of view, is the way to help them heal and grow, all right? Let's get started then. I want to begin by a distinction that you've heard me allude to in other conferences and things. But it used to be a big one in Christian culture, but we've kind of lost this distinction a lot. But I'm really forced to deal with it clinically because of the kind of stuff that walks through my door. And it is this, and in a sense, it is our foundation. It'll resonate in this talk and the next one. And it is this. I believe that when it comes to God's relationships, when God first meets someone, the first thing he asks is this person repentant or unrepentant? Okay? In other words, are they someone who's sort of open to changing? Are they humble? Are they willing to kind of look at stuff about them that's hurtful, and do they care about that? Or are they kind of comfortable being jerks and saying, it's your fault? Okay? Now, God's next step in how he deals with people is sort of predicated on the answer to this question. All right? God usually starts there with that question, and I have found that so many of us as Christians don't. In the sense that one of the things I see in Christian culture right now, which I think is kind of kooky, is as Christians, especially in our marriages, we have this vibe, we're almost taught it too, that our primary tool for dealing with other people, even if they're really hurtful, should always be gentleness and kindness and love. And we hear things like, well, she's really a cruel person, but love keeps no record of wrongs, and you need to be turning the other cheek. And are you living out Christ with them? And are you loving them through their sin? And there's this vibe that being Christ-like means being this sweet guy who's, we're always friends. I mean, Jesus is just gentle and lowly, right? Okay? But I'm constantly dealing with these nice people who are living with a jerky person who's doing jerky stuff to them, and they live in kind of a victim position, and they sort of go, well, that's just the way they are. That's just mom, And they live feeling kind of helpless to this perp. And the perp is having a great time. It's Disneyland for them. They can act any way they want, and somebody's always turning the other cheek for them, okay? So this is sort of how I've been forced to resurrect this notion of repentant and unrepentant, because you cannot relate to a repentant person and an unrepentant person using the same medicine if you want to save a marriage, all right? So I've been forced to ask this question. What does it look like to relate in a powerful, loving, Christ-like way to hurtful, difficult people? Or to good people when they're just being difficult? Because if you respond to an unrepentant, hurtful, cutting kind of person with just gentleness, with just compliance, with just submission, with just pleading, they will take that as license and they will drive you into the ground, boy. Absolute power corrupts absolutely, okay? So I want to teach you about this. I mean, we talk a lot about what love looks like as Christians, but we don't talk a lot about what the godly use of loving power looks like as Christians. And I think that is just as much a part of who God is and who we are. We've defanged Christianity. We've made it this just sweet accepting thing, and we've lost the God who has power and righteousness to protect the weak and is engaged in limit setting, that he's both love and limits and grace and truth and peace and righteousness. That mix is so key to really understanding his heart, and we've kind of lost that a little bit. So let's think about it, repentant and unrepentant. Let's start with that. Think about it. What does a repentant person need? You're screwed up. You've got a little square. You've got baggage. You've got your sin. You've got stuff in your life, and you're repentant, and you're like, I don't want to be this way. I hate being this way. I'm Romans 7. The thing I wish I do not do. I do the very thing I hate. What does that kind of person need? They need goodies. They need love, and they need restoration, and they need forgiveness, and they need arms, and they need other people, body of Christ people, supporting them and helping them and pouring new goodies into the kind of growth that we talked about last night. What does an unrepentant person need? Well, frankly, to become a repentant person. And in God's universe, if you read the Bible and if you look at like real clinical work, that usually means some sort of direct engagement in dynamics of limits and of truth. I mean, go read the Bible. There are these categories. 1 Thessalonians, help the weak, rebuke the unruly, be patient with all men. But there's this dynamic. I love Psalm 18. Yeah. Psalmist says, and God says, to the pure you are pure, and to the blameless you are blameless, and to the wicked you are shrewd. I'm like, whoa. The epistles are constantly calling us, like, if this person acts this way after warning them once, after warning them twice, have nothing to do with this person. The epistles are talking, I think it's in Titus, yeah, are talking about heads up, focused interventions on people who were hurtful or unrepentant. And we don't talk about that, but apparently God sees that kind of limit setting as not only redemptive for them, but protective for you. It does two things. The kind of limits we're going to talk about does protect you from someone who's being hurtful, but it's going to be the thing that makes them grow, okay? I was talking to a wife I'm working with, and her husband has always been he just rages. And she and I have been doing a lot of work on difficult people sort of interventions with him. And he started to soften, and he came to therapy with her. And when he came to therapy, I asked him, like, dude, like, welcome, what can we give you here? And he said, the way that she started relating to me and the way that I was living, it kind of broke me. And so now I wanted help. That's where we're going with this, because we want to help them. This is salvific, in addition to protecting you, all right? So let me tell you more where I'm going with an example. I saw a couple once, and she complained a lot. That was kind of her vibe, okay? And so she's complaining to her husband about, like, stuff at work, and this is happening, and that's happening, and this is happening, and that's happening. So her husband, he replies with recommendations for how she can fix the problem. Big surprise there, ladies, right? Okay. Well, I'll tell you what you need to do, okay? So not the best response, granted, okay? But he's kind of a fixie kind of guy like that. But then he responds like that, and she unloads on him. She just goes off. And this is kind of a pattern. This is a theme in their marriage. This is why I never talk to you, because you never support me. I should have learned my lesson a long time ago. The way you act, everything is my fault. And basically goes postal on him when he doesn't kind of act the way she wants him to act. Now think, what are our typical responses in relationships when people act that way? I think they're in your handout, but notice them because they're going to be a theme throughout this talk. One of the things we tend to do is we will defend. Oh my gosh, baby, that's not what I was saying. I didn't mean it was your fault. I was just trying to give you blah, blah. Or we'll attack back. We'll say, oh yeah, well then just don't bring me any of your, don't ever talk to me again. Or we'll cower. Okay, I'm so sorry. I'll be more careful about how to respond to you in the future, okay? Hear me, cowerers. I know that they're scary, and I know that their shame feels really bad. But if we go to defending or attacking or cowering, we give away all of our power. Here's a little bully secret of the universe. The only way to lose with a bully is not to engage. The only way to lose to a bully is to not cower, to not go in defensive, all right? With a bully, with a jerky person who's assaultive, if you engage them and win, you win. If you engage them and lose, you win. They're looking for people who don't engage. How many little kids I've told this to in the playground, all right? So we can go to defending, oh, that's not what I meant. Or we can go to attacking, which we're not going to do because anger actually comes out of our weakness. One of the major reasons that we get angry is because we feel weak. Remember our comment last night? And we're not going to be weak here. And cowering is like, I have a client who, she has a real ragey husband. And historically, she's lived in a very victim position in her life. And he starts raging at her. And she literally said, I just sat there and took it. It's like a ride at the fair. Like it's going to be over soon, I tell myself. And she feels so helpless to that. And maybe if I can just let him get it out, she says, then things can go back to normal again. Anyway, we're going to call these things defend, attack, and cower. DAC, first principle, no DAC. All right? I want you to mark, these are the things we usually do when somebody comes at us with something difficult, painful, aggressive, hurtful. We'll defend, we'll attack, we'll cower. That's our first step, is we're not going to default to those anymore, okay? We'll come back to these because these are the only choices that a bully thinks you have, okay? And not going there is going to give us a lot of leverage. Now, back to my earlier example, the case of the attacking wife and the cowering husband. Remember them? The one who goes postal on him? His response is typically to defend himself. He'll go, no, babe, that's not what I was trying to do. Because he's kind of a compliant kind of guy. That's kind of his vibe, right? And they live in this lifestyle, this dance, remember dances, in which she's always going off on him for not sort of doing her bidding or meeting her expectations. And he's always trying to convince her that he's not the bad guy, okay? Wash, rinse, repeat, okay? But what he started doing since joining my dojo is when she goes off on him, he's not going to dance monkey dance. I had a wife in my office the other day, I said that too, and she goes, yeah, I'm a good monkey dancer. Like, okay, well, we'll help stop that, all right? Instead of dance monkey dancing and cowering and trying to appease her, what he does now is he says, whoa, you know what? I care if I missed you. And I also care if it really felt bad to you. And I really am open to talking about that. Because, I mean, man, I miss the mark all the time. But I don't think I'm really willing to keep interacting with you if you just need to scold me and just need to go off on me. So I want to ask that you would shift that now, or I'm going to need to leave the room. Now notice, he's not pleading. He's not saying, stop. He's not saying, that's not what I meant. He's not raging back. He is intervening. Okay? So what we're going to talk about this morning is tools of intervention, tools of engagement for engaging difficult people. Let's go. Bottom line is going to be this. You can't control anybody. You can't make anybody stop yelling at you. In fact, we will see that to the degree that you are trying to make them stop, you give up your power. I have a husband right now whose wife goes off on him all the time. And he said, you've been really proud of me. I looked at her and I said, stop. I'm like, how did that go? And he goes, not so well. I'm like, right, because you're trying to make her stop, and all she has to do to win that is to keep going, you know? We'll get to that more in a minute. You can't control anybody, and we're not going to try to control anybody. But here's kind of the secret behind where we're going. You can't control anybody, but you can intervene. We can influence. You can't control anybody, but you can relate to them in a way that they have to learn to control themselves. And there's a science to that, and I want you to get the vibe for it. All right. So I want to look at them. And these are going to be kind of a hierarchy, kind of like Matthew 18 when Jesus says, go to your brother, and if that doesn't work, bring a friend, and if that doesn't work, bring the elders. You know, we're going to go in a hierarchy starting literal and getting more intense. Now, part of this could be, and later on in the talk we'll get to this, setting literal limits on somebody in which I change my behavior and engage them in a structured limit-setting way. Like you always scream at me when we get in the car together, so I'm not going to ride with you in the car anymore because I know you'll scream, not first rodeo, right? And that kind of limit setting in terms of how we live and interact. We'll get to that, but this can be as simple as how people talk to us. And I want to start with that. It's actually a more common opportunity to engage this, and the way people talk to us is often behind a lot of this. And if you engage how they engage you and speak to you in the day-to-day, it's going to make the bigger picture limit setting a lot easier later on. So let's just start with conversations with difficult people, okay? So what are our options with an unrepentant person, those aggressive types? What's our table of contents? This is like when James Bond goes to see Q. And it's like, you know, here are your weapons, 007, you know. Please bring them back in one piece, you know, those scenes. All right, what we're going to do, we're going to do something called Speak What Is Happening. I'll explain what that's about. We're going to start setting some limits on what I'm willing to do engaging you. We're going to allow the consequences of what they're doing to affect the relationship. And we'll spend most of our time on these three, all right? Number 3 3/4, kind of like Harry Potter. Get it? We're going to pause and remind ourselves that we're talking about some powerful interventions here, but the goal is not to win. The goal is not to alpha somebody. The goal is not to take their power and regain control. The goal is always redemptive. I'm not talking to you about how to alpha terrorists. I'm talking to you about the godly way to protect yourself and redeem hurtful people, okay? Then we'll talk later on about deeper engagements, like engage in third parties and separations. And we'll talk a little about how we can grow. If you're like, hey, I'm a jerk, how do I grow there? We'll talk some about that, all right? So since we're not going to defend, attack, or cower, DAC, what are we going to do? First level, when they start engaging you with that jab, that criticism, we're going to do something I call speaking what is happening. In other words, when they're hurtful, we're going to not talk about what they're saying. We're talking about how they're saying it. We're not going to engage in the conversation. We're going to talk about what they're doing. We're going to talk about the truth of what they're creating in reality. Let me explain what that means. It's actually really cool and super powerful. Norma did it to me a while back. That's what I get for teaching her my tricks, you know. She uses my stun guns against me. But we were having a little tiff, and I was kind of snippy and cutting. And she paused, and she said, speaking what is happening, she said, did you mean that to be mean? She said, I mean, we were having a conflict, albeit, you know, somewhat heated, but that felt like you kind of stuck the knife in and twisted a little bit. Were you wanting to hurt me? Isn't that fascinating? All of a sudden, she spoke what was happening in the room, and I had to kind of back up and look at it, like this mirror. Like, what is the deal? I sometimes call this a psychological mirror, and I use it all the time, not just in marriage. I remember when one of my kids was in college, she was home visiting, and it was like storm of the century outside, and limbs were falling. She's like, oh my gosh, I'm going to Kelsey's. And I'm like, no, you're not. Like, there's sirens going off. And she looks at me, and she says, you can't tell me what to do. I'm in college. All right, parents, how much do you want to throw down? Oh, yeah, young lady. Okay. How much do you want to DAC? How much do you want to say, you think, all right, remember the parenting conference? We time out. We're not going to go with that reptile brain in our parenting. Y'all remember Bonnie, are you on pills, that story? All right, same kind of feeling, you know, that feeling of like, what are you thinking, okay? So I made myself time out a second, and I thought, I want to speak what's happening. Just throw the mirror out there. Don't jump into defending, attacking, or cowering. Okay, baby, you can do whatever you want. I used the mirror. I said, so what you're telling me is that since you're in college, I no longer can speak into your life in any way. And she held up the mirror. And she said, okay, no, okay. And she walks away. She backed down. All right? I didn't need to throw down. I just needed to show the mirror. I use this all the time. I was visiting a family once when I was doing a conference in another state. And the teenage boy in this family, it became real apparent pretty quickly that he was really kind of a judgy sort of snob about everybody. And he was always saying sort of snarky, judgy things about people. And so I'm sitting around with his family, and he looks at me and he goes, your shoes are dumb. So you can use this all the time. These people are everywhere. Now, I could DAC at that point. No, they're not. They're Chacas. Actually, they don't even make these anymore. These are awesome. You know? I could attack back. Well, yours are dumber. I could cower like, oh, really? Well, where can I get cool shoes, you know? Instead, I use the mirror. I love the mirror. He said, your shoes are dumb. And I said, and you think a lot about what other people wear. He was dumbfounded. They do not know what to do with this. This is a throwaway. I shouldn't tell this because I'm wasting our time. But I have this little sports car that makes me drive like I'm 18. You see how much ownership I'm taking of my irresponsible behavior? It makes me drive. Okay, so I cut in front of this guy, and like I saw a spot, I made it like this, and I ended up getting stuck at the light with him. And I'm in a convertible, okay? So he rolls down his window, and he starts saying stuff to me that I can't repeat, okay? And I looked at him, and I said, you know what? You're right. Like, that was one of the dumbest things I ever did, and I almost killed both of us. And he's like, well, you heard me. And I'm like, yeah, I heard you. He's like, and I looked at him and I said, is there anything else I can give you? I mean, they don't know what to do. If you don't DAC, they don't know what to do, okay? Talk about what is happening. Now notice, a mirror does not judge. A mirror does not even tell you need to be different. I didn't say quit saying ugly things about my shoes. All right? A mirror just says the truth is so and so. All right? It speaks what is happening. This is the truth. This is what's happening. So like saying you have a piece of spinach on your tooth. All right? Now you can get that off or not. I'm just saying it's there. All right? I might not be around to see it. And James would say you're a fool if you look at your face in the mirror and then turn away. But a psychological mirror speaks what is happening. And 90% of the time, this kind of intervention with hurtful people really shuts them down. They don't know what to do with it. I had this aunt who was sort of parental and scoldy. And I was probably mid-30s. And I did something, and she completely disapproved of it. And she's like, John Cox, I cannot believe, I know your parents, and I know that your parents would have raised you better, blah, 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 blah. What's a mirror for that? No, Aunt Sally, I'm doing my best. No DAC. I said, Aunt Sally, you're scolding me. They don't know what to do with it. She starts stumbling over her words, all right? So your mother-in-law is visiting, and she's like, says to you, well, when I was raising my Jimmy, I never let the house get this messy. That pushes your buttons, right? Don't you want to defend or attack or cower? Show the mirror. Well, sounds like you've had some sweet memories. Don't give them your heart, man. Say, it sounds like you think a lot about my housekeeping. Speak what is happening. Or those jabby friends. You have those jabby friends who have those half-veiled criticism. You're saying, you and your husband are going on a trip, and they're like, oh, I could never leave my kids for that long. You know those? You had those friends, right? What do you want to say? Defend, attack, whatever? This is a fun one to use with jabby people. I could never leave my kids for that long. Say, could you help me understand more what you mean? They won't know what to say. No one's ever made them actually back this jab up. They get away with throwing the jab, and we start spinning. Can you help me understand more what you mean by that? They don't know what to say, all right? Remember the notion of going bird's eye from the other conference? And we talked about it some last night, about talking about what's happening in a relationship. This is going bird's eye on them. We're backing up and we're going, you think a lot about my shoes, okay? Notice also we're being kind here. It's not angry. It's truth-telling. Anger is how we act. Remember we said last night, anger is how we act when we don't feel powerful. In fact, there is an inverse relationship between how powerful I feel and how angry I am. To the degree that I am powerful, I will not need to be angry. To the degree that I feel less powerful, I will become more of a jerk, which is why most jerks are angry, because at some level they're very not powerful. In fact, they're very weak, and we're going to talk about that in a minute, all right? God uses this mirror all the time. Read the Old Testament. He's always telling us people, this is what you're doing, this is what you're doing, and this is where it will lead you. And God often starts there, but we don't. Just the truth of the information. Not a criticism, not an attack back, just this is what's happening, okay? Another way to point out what is happening that I love is asking mirroring questions. Questions are so cool. I've alluded to some of them. What Norma did to me, do you mean that to be mean? That was a question. A question makes me have to go objective. Well, I have to go a little frontal lobe. Was I intending to be mean? Actually was, if you're wondering. Feels good to be mean. Or a client of mine had taken the day off and played golf, and he came back home, and he said, "Ooh, I'm tired." And his wife said, "Oh, I bet you're tired. You played golf all day." He asked her a question. He said, "Are you wanting me to feel shame about taking my day off?" Isn't that massive? I love that. I was working with this couple once, and they had a small baby. And the wife was kind of shrill. And she said, "I'm going to go take a shower. Here, hold the baby." So he's like, okay. He's kind of a compliant guy, okay, whatever, like this. And so she goes, and the baby immediately falls to sleep. And so the baby's asleep. He puts the baby in the little swing. And she comes out from the shower and leads with, "Why aren't you holding the baby?" All right, well, now he's historically been kind of a compliant, defendy guy, and he would start defend and explain. But I've talked to him, and it really kind of makes him angry. It makes him feel stupid. But I've been teaching him to ask questions and teaching him to speak what is happening. And this is what he came up with. I love to hear what my clients come up with these things as we learn them. She said, "Why aren't you holding the baby?" And he said, "I'm not sure whether that's a question that you're asking or an attack on me. Can you help me know which one it is? Because I'd be glad to answer a question, but I don't think I really want to engage a challenge, a criticism." He's asking her to go frontal lobe, to look at the question. Do you hear how he's standing back and presenting this reality for her to have to engage? A lot of people who are victimized by jerks will never stop and realize that what's happening here, what she said here, is not a question. It is not a question to answer. So many people, "What do you think in doing that?" Like it's a question, and we'll answer it like it's a question. Shame on me, all right? So I'm calling that out. They're like, "Well, what do you think of inviting them to the party?" And you're going, "Well, I thought y'all were friends from work, I want to say, is that a question or a criticism? I don't think I want to do the whole critique my invitation list thing this morning. Can we do a do-over? We'll time out. In other words, I'm going to challenge what is happening. Don't answer the question of why you're not inviting that person. Talk about what is happening. All right, parallel to this, another dynamic of speaking what is happening. This first step is half of the story. Make a huge distinction between the style with which someone is speaking to you and the content with which they're speaking it. Most people who are oppressed by jerky people don't make this distinction. They will respond to the content of what someone is saying and not address the way they are being treated, okay? So I have this client whose dad's a big blowhard, and he'd be home visiting for the holidays, and, Dad would be Dad again, and Dad would come busting in the house going like, "What are you thinking, barking like that?" Now let me ask you, what is the content of that statement? Parking. What is the style of that statement? Jerky. All right? Now, my client has historically been kind of one down and stammering to his scary dad. He's like, "Well, I parked there because of so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so, okay?" In other words, he responds to the content of what his dad is saying, not the way his dad is saying it. You do that and you're toast. And if you do answer a question that's presented to you in an attacky, hurtful, jabby way, you don't realize it, but you're accidentally giving them tacit permission, a signed affidavit. "I, John Cox, do give you permission to talk to me this way because, see, I'll answer your question. I'll engage it." You're accidentally giving them permission to do that, all right? So we wonder why we often get treated by jerky people in jerky ways. The question I want us to begin reflecting on is, in what way are we maybe participating in it? And to what degree can we stop participating in it? And that's going to give us some power, okay? This brushes up against one of the biggest themes of this whole talk that's in the background, and that is no matter what they're doing, I don't want your focus to be, oh my gosh, they're acting like jerks again. I want your focus to be, where is my power? How do I learn to use it? Because if you do learn to use it, 90% of the time it can really address these issues, all right? Anyway, after spending some time in my Jedi training, this guy started addressing his dad's style. And this is hopefully starting to sound familiar. Dad says, what do you think in parking like that? And he says, wow, Dad, it's feeling like you're a little spun up about the parking. Can we do a do-over? Kind of try again? Okay? See, parking is not the issue. It's the style. And I have a zillion clients who would say, well, I thought you would want to take out the garbage. And they wonder why they're being treated like by a jerk. Because we permit it. Because we're playing. They're just following our lead. All right? So, secret of the solar system regarding this whole dynamic. You'll be treated as poorly as you permit. I'm just wanting to teach you some skills about how to not permit it in a non-conflictual and non-adversarial way. Now, notice, and we'll move to our next level. Parking Boy took things up another level. He didn't just say, what's up with the parking? Let's do a do-over. He said, I don't want to talk to you if we're going to keep doing this. Let's don't have this conversation. Let's have another one. In other words, what he did was he set a limit, which we're going to say is a rule for me. Okay? Huge intervention with difficult people. In other words, instead of complaining about how badly they treat us and wondering when they're going to start being nicer, I'm going to begin taking responsibility for myself and actually limiting how I engage them. Remember that guy we started out with? The guy whose wife is a complainer and he tried to fix it and she goes postal on him and all that. Remember that guy? Remember what he said? He said, I'm glad to talk with you, but I'm not willing to have an interaction with you if you're just going to go off on me. In other words, he set a limit. I'm not willing to engage you if you are going to be hostile to me. A rule about him, okay? See, that was more than a mirror. It was talking about what he was actually going to do. And that's what a limit is. In this case, in this story, actually, they were in the car. And so he was driving, fortunately, and she wouldn't stop. She just keeps going off on him. And he pulls into the next parking lot, and he gets out of the car, and he says to her, I don't want to control you, and I can't tell you what to do. You can yell at me all you want. I just need to not be in the car to hear it. And that can be 30 minutes, it can be 30 seconds, whenever you're done. And he sits by the side of the car, slinging his keys on his finger. That's a limit for him. He's not controlling her. We don't control other people. You can't. But you can sure limit yourself and your availability for them to do this stuff to you. Clients will say to me, you're not going to believe it. She yelled at me for like 4 hours. I always look at their feet. I'm like, what are you doing? I'm like, making sure you had feet. Like, why you stood there for 4 hours? Really? Like, where's your power in that, okay? A limit for me. Good limits are always a rule for me, not stop criticizing me. But I don't interact if you're going to be criticizing me. I'm going to need to leave the room if you're going to criticize me. All right? We don't say to an alcoholic, stop drinking. We say, I don't interact with inebriated people. You've been drinking and I don't have conversations with you when you do that. You taking that limit, having that power, so cool, okay? Now, in the car keys guy, it actually worked. So much of the time it worked. He limited how much she could dump all of his stuff on her, dump all of her stuff on him. Limited how much he was available for that. And what happened was, she was miserable underneath. Big surprise. You know, you ever think, like, why does it feel good to be mean? I mean, I hope I'm not the only person here who feels that. Like, sometimes it just feels good to let her have it, you know? Sometimes I like making my point with my finger in her face. Why does that feel good? Well, I'll tell you. Because it's like, let's say I have 10 pennies worth of shame and cruelty and insecurity and fear and junk inside of me. If I can bless you out and sort of humiliate you, I can't believe you would do something so stupid. It's like I regurgitate like 8 of those pennies onto you. And now you feel terrible. And I actually feel better because I only got 2 pennies left. Okay, this is why oftentimes really hurtful, abusive people will scream and scream and scream and yell at you, and then you're like still kind of on the floor in a puddle of blood, and they're walking around the house like, you want to go get lunch? You know, and you're like, what? Because they feel better. Like, you know, when your little kids have a stomach virus and they finally throw up and then they're running around the house, you know, it's kind of the same phenomenon. Anyway, temporarily it gets rid of those pennies, temporarily. I mean, we've all got, you know, the Denver Mint like punching out more pennies inside of us all the time. But one of the reasons that mean people are mean, and one of the reasons they enjoy it, is because as long as you're willing to be the receiver of their junk, they get rid of it. Now what happens is, if you are no longer available, if you start to set the limits, if you start to walk out of the room or engage them in a powerful way, those pennies bounce right back on them. And what you see is, and this is the reason this works, what you see is those cruel, hurtful, cutting people start living with all of that cruel, hurting stuff inside of them, and it starts to feel terrible, and they start to unravel. I'm working with a woman right now whose husband was like, he's like just this like jerky little narcissist. And she's really been setting wonderful limits on him, and it kind of has broken him too. And he started going to therapy together with another therapist. I work with her, but they're doing couples. And she came in a couple weeks ago and she said, you know, now that I don't let him dump all of his stuff on me, he's just this kind of sad giant bag of terrible feelings. And I'm like, right. That's why I used to be a sad, terrible bag of hurting feelings, because he gave them to you. Okay? So a limit is, I'm going to set limits on what I'm willing to do. Another couple, they had this pattern. She would always ask him about what's going on in his life, at work, whatever like that. He would tell her, and then she would criticize him for it. Why are you going to do that? Okay? On repeat. These are patterns. So he and I are talking about that, and he has this business. He's a good businessman. He wants to expand the business. He's talking to these big shots, and they're flying back and forth places. And I'm like, so what are you doing with the business? He said, I think we're moving forward with it. And I said, okay. So he goes, but I know that, you know, wife is going to ask me about it, and then she's going to beat me up for it. I'm like, right, not first rodeo, right? He's like, yeah. I'm like, so what do you want to do? He says, well, I don't want to tell her. And I said, well, cool, don't, but tell her why. In other words, engage her with a loving truth and a limit. So sure enough, she says, what'd y'all do with that business expansion? And he said, you know, I got to be honest with you about it. I'm not sure I want to talk to you about work right now. Because see, what happens is, see, he's going bird's eye. What happens is, he's talking about what's happening. What happens is, you often ask me about stuff that I'm doing, and then I tell you, and then you criticize me for it. And I'm not going to beg you to stop. You can criticize me all you want. It's not control, remember? But here it is, the limit. But I don't think I want to talk to you about stuff at work until I see sort of that pattern change for us. And of course, what she says is, well, what's that supposed to mean? And it's like, bullet dodged, baby. He didn't walk into that bear trap again, okay? And she sort of proved that he was on the right track, okay? But there's the psychological mirror, but he's also changing the way he's relating to her, okay? And frankly, he's taken responsibility for his role in this dance. What most people who live with oppressed spouses will do is come in and use he language and she language. You don't believe what she said today. You don't believe what he did last week. On and on and on and on. Like, look at what this bad person is doing to me, and never really take responsibility for actually engaging. What can I do? You know what? Why am I not better at dealing with a difficult person? What is that? And one day they start asking that question. How can I learn to better Jedi these people who are hurtful? And I want to throw a little party with a mariachi band and little drinks with umbrellas and stuff, because now there's hope. Now these people can change, okay? Now, sometimes when I talk about these kind of interventions, Publicly, people will push back on me a little bit and say, that feels like that's mean, or that's punishment, or that's like a retaliation. No, it's relating to them according to reality. The way you treat someone will affect them. In other words, think if you went to a shoe store, and you walk in the shoe store and they go, we don't sell shoes to ugly looking people with big fat feet like yours. Let me ask you, where are you more or less likely to go to that shoe store? Okay? Now, you're probably not going to go back unless there's something really wrong there we can talk about. But why won't you go back? Is this retaliation? Are you punishing them? No, people just don't typically go back to shoe stores that talk like that. Okay? That's what happens. And my clients who are being oppressed by hurtful people are people who continue to go back to the same shoe store and wonder why they're feeling insulted all the time. You'll be treated as poorly as you permit, okay? So this is about reality, not retaliation. In fact, if we continue relating to jerks as if what they do to us does not affect us, we're actually distorting reality to them. We're saying, in essence, you can spend $1 and not have $1 less. You can treat me in a hurtful way and I'll just still be, hey, okay? We're lying. Other examples of some limits. Your spouse is constantly critical of how you act. They're like, well, you know, we wouldn't have these troubles if you weren't so-and-so and so-and-so. Now, don't you want a DAC there? Well, I'm not this. I'm only this because you're, and you go at it. You're into the fight. I want you to say this limit. They're like, we have these problems because of you this and you that. I want you to say, you know what? You really may be right. And if what you're saying is you want to have a conversation in which the two of us both get curious about both of our roles, about how we both contribute to the difficulty in our marriage, sign me up. Let's go. But I don't really think I really want to have a conversation that's just about, let's talk about how I'm bad again. So let me know what you want to do. Limit, rule for me, rule for me. I had this guy in my office once who went off on me. I'm sitting there in my chair. He gets up. He's mad at me. He gets up across the room, stands over me in the chair with his finger in my face, says, Cox, you listen to me, man. And he starts going off on me, all right? Now, don't you want a DAC at that point? Like, dude, back off. Or, dude, I'm doing the best I can. Or I'm a helping person, a therapist. Be nicer to me. You know, what do you want to do, right? I looked at his finger. I said, I don't talk to fingers. He said, why would you say that? I said, I don't talk to fingers. A limit, a rule about me, all right? Which brings us to step 3. Allowing consequences. And this is limits, in a sense, taken up another notch, okay? In other words, sometimes we have to sort of allow there to be a cost to what people are doing in a hurtful way. And I'm calling it allow consequences rather than create consequences, because we're not creating these. We're just allowing the consequences of the way they're living to actually affect them. Kind of like the shoe store, okay? Basic principle of growth in you or in other people. And this will have application later on when we talk about if you want to grow in this area personally. The only way that we ever grow in out of control areas of our lives is to experience a literal experiential cost to it, an event to it. In other words, you can like reflect all day long about your need to change, but unless there's an actual literal cost in the world, you will not change. And the bully in your life won't change. This is reference the parenting conference. What's the least powerful tool you have with your children? Your words. You can argue all day long. What is children's learn language that we talked about at the parenting conference? Experience, time out, an event. They're concrete thinkers. And the 5-year-old square that's beating you up is a concrete thinker. They need to experience consequences to what's happening, all right? This was an amazing one of my favorites. I had a couple, and he wouldn't come to therapy. She did. And he blatantly flirted with women all the time in this really kind of like ick kind of way. And it was really humiliating to his wife, and she kind of wondered if he was taking it further, but didn't know, and it's kind of scary. And he would try to ask her, she would ask him, like, would you please stop that? Would you please, engage that in a different way? And he would just blow her off. Well, one day his wife, his mother gets sick. And he says to his wife, she's historically been really mousy and kind of victim-y, and she would ask him to change, but he wouldn't. But his mother gets sick, and he asks if she'll help take care of his mother. And she's done a lot of growth by this time. She's not mousy anymore. She's Superfly TNT. She's the Guns of Navarone. And what she says to him is this: you know what? I would absolutely be completely glad to help you with your mother. But I have a question I need to ask you first. Are you saying you want us to start having the kind of relationship in which when one of us needs something, that the other one responds in a positive, open way? Because on so many occasions, that's not how you've responded to me. On so many occasions, I've asked you to re-engage, rethink the way in which you relate to women, and you just blow me off. Are you saying that you want to change our relationship to one in which we actually let what one another needs matter and take that into account? If so, absolutely. I want that kind of relationship, and I will help you with your mom. But that's not the way you've been relating to me. So frankly, I'm a little confused. So which kind of relationship do you want? One in which we care for one another, or one in which we don't? You answer that question for me, and I will answer your question about caring for your mother. And I'm like, in my chair, mic drop. This house is clean. You see what she's done? She says, I'm going to allow the way that you have treated me to affect me in reality. And almost every oppressed spouse I see will protect the oppressor in some way and not let it cost them. You can treat me any way you want, and I'm still available. I'm like water. Anytime you want water, it's there. I tell my clients like this: I want you to become wine. We're like 750 milliliters, Cabernet Sauvignon. We treasure it. Why? Because it's rare. It's hard to get. I want you to be that valuable. Now again, this is not retaliation or vengeance. Retaliation and vengeance would be if she said, oh, tide has turned now, big boy, huh? Now you're wanting something from me? I don't think so, That would be retaliation. She's just relating to him on the basis of how he has decided he wants his reality to be, like the shoe store. That's why I call it allow the consequences. She's not thinking, how can I punish him? She's going, it's kooky for someone who never engages in a pure-like, loving way to just all of a sudden expect for me to. And most oppressed spouses will do that anyway, okay? So it's not a punishment, it's an attention getter. So many spouses I'll see, their spouse have a habit of screaming and raging at them habitually at night, and then they'll apologize the next morning, and the next way they're doing it again. And here's the key. Later they'll go, hey, babe, remember I had that work party this weekend? And every oppressed spouse will say, well, okay, he's apologized and everything. I had a client who this was happening to, and I asked her, I said, well, do you want to go to the work party with this person who called you names I can't say in church? And they're like, no, but he said, I'm sorry, which will be the next talk. But I love this one. They'll go, I don't, but it would hurt his feelings if I said no. And I'm like, baby cakes, if dude ever thought about hurting your feelings, we wouldn't be sitting here anymore. If it ever crossed his mind that might hurt her feelings, we'd be done with therapy, okay? So I want her to say, you know what? Thank you so much for your apology. That means so much. That's exciting. Maybe we can resolve these things. I don't really think I want to go to the party quite yet because I'm still trying to make sense of the hurt that I keep experiencing from the way that you yell at me. But I would love for our relationship to grow to the place where we could have those kind of things again, like parties or lunches or trips or whatever. So let's start working on that. But we're not there yet, are we? Now, at that point, he's going to go ballistic and scream and say more names, and you're going to realize he was not sorry at all. He was just in the I'm sorry wing of his crazy cycle. Okay, unfortunately, you weren't. All right? So, difficult people's secret of the universe. Maybe love keeps no record of wrongs, but sometimes wisdom must. And we absolutely must with an unrepentant. Another, by the way, sometimes I'll talk about these kind of interventions and people go, that feels like parenting. That feels like I'm setting limits and discipline on my child. And I remind them that creating consequences and speaking the truth is not parenting. All right? Parents often do these things because they're relating to chronically irresponsible people. It just so happens that you're married to a chronically irresponsible person who, by some coincidence of chronology, doesn't happen to look like a child anymore. But, you know, that's not parenting, that's godliness, man, okay? Another, by the way, on this is about, when I'm working with women about this, especially in the office, about a third of them will go, yeah, but that's not being submissive. By the way, I put a really cool new podcast on the podcast, The Good Enough Living, on leadership and submission. It's cool. I recorded it in my closet. Don't tell anybody. Because nobody ever goes, come to our church and do a class on leadership and submission. I'm like, I'm doing this in my closet. My tech guy goes, your sound quality was good. I'm like, that's the sound of Brooks Brothers, you know, so, and jean jackets, that muffling, you know, good resonance. All right, a third of the wives will say, that's not being submissive, you know? No, that's not, you're missing the point. What we're talking about is the part of your role that God called in Genesis 2, that powerful helper, that Ezer. And if you dig into that word, go listen to the podcast. If you dig into that word, it is a role of a woman who has this godly, powerful role in the life of her husband. There's only one other person in the Bible who is called an Ezer, and that is God in his relationship with Israel. And he says to Adam, you need somebody, we need a helper in there. And in our culture, that sounds like a one-down thing. We need somebody in there who manifests like God in his relationship with Israel, this role of power and limit setting and growth and engagement. So don't get lost in the whole be submissive thing, okay? It's much more nuanced like that. All right, let's go another step. Comes a times when you set limits like this, they will fight back. What do you do when you bring some of these interventions and they come back at you? Oh my gosh, you're so judgmental. Oh my gosh, I guess everything has to be your way. One of them I heard last week was, oh, I forget. This is Christine's world and we all just live in it. All right? What do they do when they throw a zinger like that? You're so judgmental. Don't DAC. With those people, I want to go, oh my gosh, I don't want to be judgmental. Would you teach me how I can talk to you about how you were hurtful in a way that's not judgmental? Because I don't want to be judgmental. Will you help me? They won't know what to do. In other words, you're saying, can you teach me how I can tell you you're a narcissistic maniac without it sounding judgmental? But we're not going to say that out loud, okay? But anyway, if they throw a zinger like that, I want to have some skin in the game. You can't just say, you know, you're so judgmental, and I'm like, what do I say? I'm going to say, cool, I don't want to be, teach me, okay? Or, you know, you obviously really don't care about our marriage if you're walking out of the room. Or, oh, you're so sensitive. When you start setting limits, they will take it up a notch. Oh, I guess everything's my fault. This is that gaslighting thing you hear people talking about a lot nowadays. And that is, you're actually the sane person in the room, and a lot of times the bully will try to turn the tables on you and make you look crazy, okay? So they say, oh my gosh, you're just being so sensitive. Use the psychological mirror on them. Go, so you really feel like I'm saying all of this because I'm too sensitive? You sound really certain about that. Are you interested in getting curious? Do you want to ask me any questions? Or do you just want to stay certain that that's what I am, is too sensitive? And walk out of the room. Now you've left them with this thing that will start eating away at that cruelty, all right? Once we give up our need to prove those finger pointers wrong, I'm not bad, I'm not too sensitive, I'm not judgmental. Once we give that up, you get free, man, okay? That's the only power they have, is I'm going to criticize you and make you dance, all right? Mama, don't dance. What if they get more aggressive? They're yelling at you, leave the room. They go to the room, close the door. They bang on the door, leave the house, grab the kids. They follow you out of the house, get in the car. They bang on the car window, back out. They stand behind the car so it can't back out, call the cops. We can take this as far as we need, man, okay? But you're not a victim here, all right? I want you to have that power, all right? I find this kind of teaching incredibly absent in Christian circles. We're just like, go back, turn the other cheek, be submissive, take the high road, whatever. And those relationships get worse, okay? I think this is actually what 1 Peter 3 means when it talks about winning someone over without a word. It's living with them in a powerful Christ-like way. With a repentant person, it's mercy. With an unrepentant person, it's limits. You start living the principles of God with somebody, and it starts to infuse their software with godly principles, okay? All right. I'm talking so much to y'all as spouses. Let me take that another notch, because this is something I learned the hard way by doing it wrong for 15 years. The reason I'm teaching this so aggressively, both in my practice and here, is because what used to happen is a couple would come in and there'd be more of a victim spouse and an aggressor spouse. And I don't tolerate bullies, all right? I'll go at them. And so this bully would come in, male or female, and I'd be like, listen to the way you're talking to him. I mean, that's really demeaning to him. And pretty soon, me and the bully would be going back and forth, having our own argument. And one day I noticed that the victim spouse is sitting there watching it, like Wimbledon, you know? They're not doing anything, okay? And ultimately what happens is that the aggressor spouse will leave therapy because somebody's actually calling them out, all right? And they'll end up seeing every therapist in town that way. You'll see a lot of these couples in which the jerky person will see every therapist until they call them out. Until it crossed my mind, what's this person doing? They're just sitting there watching. And I learned, instead of pushing back on the jerky person, to do Jedi training on the more vulnerable person, and it worked. Here's the secret. The only person who has the power to actually change a hurtful spouse is their spouse. That's what I learned that changed all of this. Once I started empowering the, quote, victim spouse to learn some, powerful taekwondo here, they have access to their spouse in a way that no one else does. Why? Because their spouse is actually really very weak. Remember I alluded to that? Their spouse needs them so much. It's very interesting to watch that take place. I mean, strong people don't have to act mean. But jerky people act mean because they feel pretty weak. And if you take away access to you, you may be asking, like, well, okay, walking out of the room, not willing to talk, get out of the car and not engage. How is that going to help? Because they really need you. And once they feel your absence, they start to unravel, okay? One of the guys, aggressive guys, I was working with his wife, and he, as she started to set these limits, he finally shifted and he said, I'm realizing I'm not angry at you when I rage. I'm angry at the world, and there is something wrong inside of me. And I'm like, yes, Jesus, now we can help him. That's the goal of these things, okay? But they need us to set the limit. And the reason it works is because they need us. So I was working with a woman years back, and her husband was sort of like just a little petulant little 8-year-old. And I finally taught her to stop interacting with him when he would do that stuff. And like when he would verbally abuse her, she would leave. But then they went through a season where after she would leave, he would call her on the phone. And say it with me, she would answer it. Right, okay? And we wonder why we get treated this way, all right? Well, gratefully, I got her to stop answering her phone. And he would bless her out. She would say, I'm not going to engage you for doing this. She would leave. He would call her phone, and she wouldn't answer it. He freaked out. He gets all scared. He starts texting her friends. He's like calling her mom. He's blowing up the phone. Is she okay? I can't find her. Okay? He's this little boy inside who's taking out his tantrums on her. All right? Now, once she started doing that kind of engagement, he softened. He got into therapy. He started talking to his priest. It was cool. That power awaits you. Those of you who feel oppressed and controlled. Related to that, in a marriage with an aggressor, your power, your intervention, the power of the oppressed spouse is the therapy. People are always like, this person's crazy. We need to get them into counseling. And they won't go. And if they do, they'll just stay there until you say something they don't like. You grow. Like our question last night. You grow. That is therapy for an unrepentant person. Therapy is not something that takes place in a room with a guy with a couch, okay? Therapy is any relationship in which I'm getting what I need to grow. And in the case of an unrepentant person, that is limits set on them, all right? Now, brief segue, number 3 3/4. Remember the goal of all of this. I hope you've heard in the background. The goal of all of this is the only way, the most loving thing you can do to an out-of-control, destructive person is set limits on them. Romans 1 talks about the worst judgment God ever does. And that is those people are doing all those destructive things and not being grateful and worshiping the creature instead of the creator. And what does God do? Gives them over to. With people God loves, he intervenes with limits and power and makes them miserable until their hearts come back to life. With people he doesn't care about, he gives you over. C.S. Lewis said there's 2 kinds of people in the world. Those who say to God, thy will be done, and those to whom God finally says, thy will be done. So these interventions are the way to not just protect you from the jerky dynamic, they're a way to really save these people. All right, what we've done so far is 80% of what you will ever need dealing with difficult people. Okay, we could actually stop now, but I'm not. Because I'm going to throw out 2 more because we're going to take it up a couple of uglier notches because I want you to have that. And that is, sometimes we need to pull in third parties. Here's a secret of the universe with difficult marriages. Chronic hurtfulness only works in secret. How many times I have somebody and they're like, my spouse is this, my spouse is that. And I'm like, well, who else knows? And they're like, nobody. You know, I don't want my family to dislike her. I don't want the kids to blah, blah, blah. No, God says the next step is to bring in other parties, family, friends, whatever. There are a lot of ways to do this. I had a wife once I was working with, and her husband would wait till she was in the car and he was driving before he would start to rage at her. And we were like coming up with, what do you do then? You can't bail out of the car. You're trapped, right? So I said, well, I mean, you could like always take another car until you see a real pattern of change for him. You know, show up at the Ole Miss game in Oxford in 2 cars and let him explain why you're there in 2 cars. But she actually had a better example. She connected up with one of his friends and said, you know the kind of rage problem he has. Can I call you when he's raging at me? And the dude's like, yeah. So now they get in the car. He starts raging. She just like holds the phone up. And if the friend's not there, then, I mean, you get an interesting voice message, right? But I love that intervention, bringing in third parties. Lastly, sometimes we need some sort of a separation. I call it a disciplinary separation to distinguish it from like a formal legal separation to end the marriage, that kind of thing. There's a role scripturally of have nothing to do with that person, of setting limits about these people. And that's not to destroy the relationship. It's like open heart surgery to save it. Like I had a couple and he had been unfaithful and she pushed him to move out for a while. And he lived away from the family for a while and it got his attention, a direct cost. I was working with a woman once whose father was really cruel. And I thought this was an elegant intervention. She intervened with her mother, Because remember, the only person who has power in the life of a difficult spouse is their spouse. She intervenes with her mother and says, we're not going to be able to come over to the house for a while until you and Dad work out this thing of how cruel he is to me and my husband and the kids. And she created this separation. All right? All right, let's wrap it up, and then we'll take a break. People always tell me, everybody I teach this to is like, whoa, 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 I could never do this. But then they learn how to do it, and I'm still kind of surprised at how well it works. When we stop pointing the finger at what they're doing and start asking ourselves more like, how do I become a kung fu master at actually engaging a difficult person? They change, okay? This is sanctification for unrepentant people, all right? And don't worry if you don't get it right away. You're going to have the same interaction. You're going to DAC. That's fine. Back off. Take notes. Monday morning quarterback it. They're probably going to give you a chance to do this again. Just spitball in here. How might I want to approach that differently? Take your time. Do a redo. Monday morning quarterback it. And secondly, break for time. If they say, you would think something like that, and you don't know what to say, and you're about to go into defend, attack, comply, go, I'm not really sure how to respond to that. Remember what I told you in the last marriage conference? Conflict should be golf, not tennis. They hit a ball at you, and we usually are like, you got to hit it right back. No, it's golf. Like, slow down. Take your time. See how the green breaks. They're not going anywhere. And then decide how you want to intervene, okay? Last thing, and we can talk about this more if you want during Q&A. I just find it an interesting dynamic. If you are jerky like me and you want to grow, what do? You need two things. Number one, you need some sort of an insight and healing into that little square that's driving this. Because this is your little square. This is that immature, childlike part of you. And that part of you is hurting a lot if you need to hurt someone else that much, okay? But if that's all you do is get insight and healing and all that, what you'll end up being is a very nurtured and insightful rageaholic, okay? So you also have to have literal experiential limits set on you, okay? In other words, I got a guy right now, and I'm working with his wife. He just loves video games, and then he rages at his wife. And he's like, I promise I want to stop. I don't want to keep raging at you. I'm like, excellent. He's trying to be repentant. Tell him, like, cool, that's good. What are you willing to give up if you rage at me again? How about your games for 2 weeks? Now we find out where the rubber meets the road, okay? Am I willing to let it cost me? Unless it costs me in real reality, I'm not going to really change. Like I say, we can talk more about that. But if you are a jerky person and are asking this question, you're close to kingdom. Congratulations. All right, let's break there. Let's come back at 20 till, something like that, and we'll talk about forgiveness. And forgiveness is shorter than this one. It'll give us plenty of time to do questions. 2 is equaling 7. Well, another thing that can clog up our marriages and our relationship is old garbage, old injuries, old stuff that's never resolved between us. In other words, things that are never repaired. And you have a conflict that seems like it's kind of run-of-the-mill. And you know that experience where it starts out small and before you know it, it's like that, you know, that vault at Gringotts where the cups all like, you know, all of a sudden this is becoming way bigger than we thought it was going to be. And your spouse is finally like, well, this is like that thing you did on our honeymoon. And you're like, whoa, you know, where did that come from? Here's where it comes from. Sad secret of the universe. Most humans, most of us actually don't know how to repair and heal and forgive an injury once we've caused one. It doesn't very often come in our skill set, all right? I mean, we apologize or we defend or we promise we'll do better or whatever like that, but we often don't know how to heal and how to resolve and how to forgive, and that can leave us sort of a bleeding mess All right? I mean, imagine if you never healed from every little cut you've ever had. By the time you're my age, you'd just be this big, yucky, bleeding wound. You know, do you ever feel like that in your marriage? Or think about your house. Think about how many things in your house are there just to get rid of garbage, get rid of yuck. Mops, brooms, sinks, toilets, vacuum cleaners, dishwashers, washing machines. Think about it, soap, dish towels. Everything in your house is there to get rid of the junk in your house, to get rid of the garbage. Think what your house would look like if you had none of those things, all right? That can often describe a marriage if we aren't becoming more and more skilled at what it means to heal injuries, forgive injuries. I'll have people say to me sometimes, I just don't feel like I love him anymore. And as I listen to their story, the case often is this. I will tell them love is sort of like a light bulb. And it's shining with the light of love, okay? And every injury, every wound is like a drop of tar on it. Now, if that tar isn't cleaned off as it grows, as it comes along, what will happen is it will grow. And pretty soon the whole light bulb is covered in tar. And from where you sit, you don't see the light of love anymore. It's just like, I don't love him anymore. But it might still be burning underneath if we could heal this stuff, if we could engage what forgiveness looks like. So I want to talk about forgiving and letting go of injuries and healing, which is often difficult for us humans. As C.S. Lewis said, I love this quote, creatures like ourselves, he says. This is difficult for creatures like ourselves who actually find hate such a pleasure that giving it up is like giving up beer or tobacco. Okay, so we're going to talk about forgiveness and its sister, healing. I've never really heard anybody really unpack how forgiveness works, which, as I said, I think is kind of odd given how central it is to our faith. I think Keller's book on forgiveness is helpful, but he tends to focus so much on the cultural dynamic of forgiveness, and he focuses a lot on the spiritual dimensions of forgiveness, which is rich. And that dynamic of empowering our forgiveness because we've been forgiven, but it still leaves me with a lot of questions. Everything I've read on forgiveness leaves me with a lot of questions, like, what do we do with the relational, emotional, heart psychological dynamics of how you actually pull it off? How do I actually get to the place where I feel forgiving? I mean, it's fine to tell me I need to forgive people or because I've been forgiven by Christ, but when I wake up in the middle of the night and I'm angry at that person, what am I supposed to do with that? You can't grit your teeth and just will that away, okay? So I want to talk about that. Why is it hard to forgive? And I find forgiveness to be grossly misunderstood by, I was going to say the majority, but by all of my clients. I mean, basically what I hear is, my wife has hurt me and she's still hurting me, but you're just supposed to forgive everyone, right? And I'm like, well, does she care? Is she like helping you any with this forgiveness thing? And they're like, no, she just tells me I'm too sensitive and move on. She's one of these people we just talked about in the last talk. And he's sitting there burdened with this obligation to forgive, and you have this perp running around the house hurting him, and she doesn't care what she's done. I mean, and he's the one feeling guilty? That feels kind of backwards to me, all right? Or maybe you feel like you have to forgive because they've apologized. I kind of keep a little running list of the anti-apologies. Y'all can add some if you want later on. I'm sorry for whatever I did that made you feel that way. Look, I'm sorry. I'm not perfect, okay? I'm sad, I'm sorry. What more do you want? Yeah, I made some mistakes, okay? Like, that just makes me feel all warm inside, right? That's the kind of apologies you often get, you know. So, we're supposed to forgive. Spiritually speaking, to heal those injuries in our marriages and our relationships. Again, I told you, and I told leadership as they publicized this conference, some dear person caught me in the break and said, I'm not married and this is so helpful. Yes, this is applicable to your whole life. That's one of the reasons I like this conference. But how do we forgive? Why should we forgive? Last time I checked, it's hard to forgive. Why is it so hard? How do we do it? Let's talk about forgiveness. We're going to make some distinctions. Forgiveness versus this, forgiveness versus that, to try to pull this apart a little bit so we can understand it better. Now, you probably know where I'm going to start with this, if you know me very well at all, and that is to remind you that the first question that God asks when he encounters somebody is, are they repentant or they're unrepentant? All right, and just as this was vital in the dynamic of limit setting with difficult people in conflict, this distinction is so important when it comes to making sense of forgiveness. It's the first crossroads that we run into. Is the person that we're trying to forgive repentant? Do they care? And this is important because it's a lot harder, it's a lot messier to forgive someone who is unrepentant. It's someone who doesn't acknowledge they've hurt you. It gets stickier, more complicated. But I want you to have this distinction because most Christians in our culture don't make this distinction. We're just like, well, you're supposed to forgive everybody, right? Okay? Bottom line this, I believe the rules are different and the dance is different depending on whether the person you're needing to forgive is repentant or unrepentant. So let's think. What does God tell us to do regarding forgiving a repentant person? They've hurt you. They're broken by their sin. They come to you to ask forgiveness. What are you supposed to do? You're supposed to forgive them, okay? 70 times 7. You know the drill. Now, for us as humans, we can talk more about this if you want, but for us as humans, we don't forgive other humans out of our benevolent loving kindness like God does. According to God, the reason that we are called to forgive one another is not because you're such a great guy that you are full of forgiveness for me. We forgive one another because who are we to talk? In other words, our forgiveness comes out of the fact that we are forgiven, that we are as corrupt inside as this person, that we're not letting them off the hook. We're recognizing we're on the same hook. We're called to forgive a repentant brother or sister, not because you should be good and do that, but because what does it say about you if you don't? It says something really kind of kooky about you in Christendom, in the world of the Spirit. It says, how dare this person be that bad? And I will hold them that accountable. Why? Because I would never do something like that. In other words, unforgiveness with a repentant person is a distortion. That's one of the reasons that God connects it in the Lord's Prayer. Forgive us as we forgive others. Because how can you be in league, in connection with God and his forgiveness if you don't recognize how much you're needing it and therefore how much other people are needing it? All right, so with a repentant person, we'll talk about how that actually works to forgive. But with a repentant person, we're called to forgive because who are we to talk? What about with an unrepentant person? Well, it gets more complicated. What does God tell us to do with an unrepentant person? Well, he says lots of things. He says go to them. He says love them. He says rebuke them. He says pray for them. He says admonish them. He says bring others with you to them. Sometimes he says have nothing to do with these people. He says love them. In other words, see, it all of a sudden gets a lot more complicated. The dynamics are trickier. All right? I want you to have that distinction just to start out. I'm not saying we should forgive one and not the other at all. I'm just saying I want you to recognize these as very different animals because we don't make that distinction in the church anymore, okay? I'm speaking here to those of you who can feel burdened to pursue the relatively simple, straightforward process of forgiving someone who is unrepentant and they don't care and you're burdened like, I need to forgive them. And Corella's over there like polishing her fingernails. She doesn't care, you know? So I want you to have this category. It might be different. On the other hand, Mark 11 says, forgive anything against anyone. So it's complicated. I want it to be complicated. But I want them to make this distinction, okay? All right, so let's start with repentant people because that's easier. And by repentant, I mean more than saying I'm sorry. Repentant sounds like this. I know that what I did must have injured you so much. Dang. I know it must have felt like you didn't matter at all, given how I treated you. Repentance sounds like, I want to know, teach me, help me. learn how I can help you heal. Repentance sounds like, help me understand what it took from you that I treated you that way. In other words, a heart orientation toward broken humility. That's what repentance sounds like. Like, I hate this and I don't want it in my life or yours. Not, I'm sorry, will you forgive me? Okay? That's actually asking for something for me. You're the hurt one and I want you to give me forgiveness? Woo. So what do we do when somebody's humble and repentant? We forgive them. Great. So how, though? It's hard. Let's go ahead and talk about that. I want to go ahead and talk about why I think forgiveness is so hard to do, why it is difficult, and it hinges on this. It hinges on the dynamic of mattering. So our first distinction is going to be forgiveness versus not mattering, because the theme of forgiveness is going to hinge on what it does to what it feels like about how you and this injury matter. Stay with me. It begins here. A major reason that forgiveness is hard or restoration is hard is because any injury always involves a cost. All right? In other words, with issues of forgiveness, somebody's injured and somebody pays. Think about it. Even with something simple, you wreck my car, somebody pays. Either you pay to get my car fixed, or I pay to get my car fixed, or I drive a beat-up car around, but somebody is going to pay. There's no way nobody pays, all right? And with relational issues, with heart wounds, somebody pays too. What do they pay? How do we pay? Like this. You've hurt me. We're not even anymore. Okay? I'm hurt and you're not. And if we don't hurt them back, and if we don't hold a grudge, and if we don't rage in for vindication, there's this real spiritual sense in which we're paying for this injury and they're kind of getting away with it. Okay? The emotional result is we're not even Stephen. We pay and they don't. They walk away, we're hurt. We don't hurt them back. I bear the cost. I don't retaliate. Somebody pays. See, here's where it's hard. Because if we forgive and don't demand justice, payback, you owe me this something, it creates something I call the injustice gap. And the injustice gap means in forgiveness, if I absorb the injury and I don't retaliate and I don't get back at you, it leaves this inequity. You hurt me and I don't hurt you back. I'm the hurt one and you're not. And we're going to leave it like that? And that's a huge reason that forgiveness is so hard, because something in us resists that inequity so much. Here's why, my theory. Here's why I think it spanks us, okay? My theory is that to forgive someone, to make them not pay, get so really close to the edge. That injustice gap gets so close to the edge of, in essence, saying, I might be saying that the fact I was injured like that and I'm just going to not retaliate and make you pay back, it says that that injury doesn't even matter. And therefore, I don't matter. The fact that you would hurt me so much and I don't make you suffer for it, does that mean I don't matter? Does that mean this injury doesn't matter? It just goes away? I just forgive it? It gets so close to that, so close to saying the injury doesn't matter, you're forgiven, and I don't matter. And that kind of forgiving can feel like it diminishes us so much that we often can't do it. And that's why forgiveness is hard. There's something core in humans to where once we're injured, there's something in our hearts that kind of is screaming for an equal weight of repair and restoration to match the weight of that injury. And if that equal weight is not there, it can leave us really hooked. Let me put a face on this. This is in the parenting book. But I was watching Catherine and Callie play when they were little once. And Catherine just reared back and just whacked Callie across the face. I'm watching this. And Callie starts crying. And I'm like, Catherine, You just whacked your sister. Callie, crying and all. Catherine's looking real guilty. And I'm like, go to timeout. And she says to me, can't you just forgive me? And there's this little moment I have, like, oh, a teaching moment. Like, we could talk about grace. We could talk about, redemption. I mean, how many times do I do destructive things and I look at God and go, can't you just forgive me? This might be cool. And then I saw Callie's face as she saw me contemplate this. And she was like, what would it have said to Callie if I just said, yeah, don't worry about it. You're forgiven, babe. You feel the weight of what that would cost Callie? What it says to how much she matters? She would feel an injustice gap of I get whacked, she just gets away with it, and you're going to leave it like, you feel how much that hurts? That's why forgiveness is hard. Because we encounter that kind of inequity. So in order to forgive, we're going to have to address this feeling of not mattering before we go any further. What's got to happen? Our only hope, if we forgivers are going to lose that much, because forgiveness costs so much, our only hope is that forgivers are going to need to be given to in some serious ways. We need to be receiving a lot if we're going to be about forgiving. So let's talk about what forgivers need for a minute to create a soft landing pad. And we're going to have a pretty neat little answer to the injustice gap down the road, okay? So what do forgivers need? What do we need to have in order to survive the injustice gap? Number one, the first thing we need to contain all that inequity is that we need to have the way in which we were injured be heard. Remember I was talking last night about something about pain, being engaged with another person in relationship helps metabolize that pain. The principle is to heal an injury, to deal with the inequity or to deal with the sorrow of what I'm forgiving. I need that injury to be heard. The 3 H's, healing, heals, hearing, heals, hurt, okay? As we'll say in just a minute, forgiveness is a process, a lot like grief actually. And like all emotional processes, it begins with it being safe to speak the truth of the pain and that be heard. A forgiver needs to have some context, and sometimes with a repentant person it can be the injurer. We need to have a context and we can say, they did this to me. It hurt like that. She said this. This happened. And having that injury met and engaged and connected to. Just like what we were saying last night, that the only way we heal injuries is in relationship, okay? Basic principle, pain alone never gets better. And injuries that are never spoken so continue to feel in this place of inequity like they don't matter, and that makes them the dickens to heal and forgive, all right? So unless we're in the context of a lot of love and mattering, letting go of an injury and sitting with that inequity and forgiving will feel like it diminishes me so much that I probably won't do it, which is why we often struggle with forgiving, okay? Now, unfortunately, a lot of times Christians kind of push back on this whole dynamic of speaking the injury because it sounds a lot like blame. Well, it does sound a lot like blame because it is blame. Not all blame is bad, okay? Proper blame is the first step in healing an injury, okay? Think about God and the prophets. What do you hear him say? He names the sin. Now, we know he's on the road to redeeming these people. You can read the end of Isaiah. You know he's going to do something restorative here. But how does he start? I have given you this, and I have given you that, and look at what you've done to me. Like he says in Jeremiah, like a woman who's unfaithful to her husband, you were unfaithful to me. Now, if that's where the story stopped, with God's blame, we'd be in a heap of trouble. And if all we ever did was point the finger and live in a victim position of blame forever and never get better, it'd be a whiny victim. That's why blame gets its bad name. It's because people often will just live there. But if we don't point the finger at all, if we don't name the injury at all, then it's never been named and heard, and they'll never let go of it. See? In other words, sometimes people have trouble actually forgiving an injury and healing it because they never feel justified in feeling it and speaking it. It needs to be heard, the anger, the hurt, etc. Now, this sort of understanding and hearing is best when it comes from the injurer. Repentant people, okay? Instead, what I usually hear is hurtful spouses say things like, oh my gosh, look, it's over. You know, I fired the secretary. I left the personal trainer, whatever, let's move on. Or like, I'll never do it again, it's in the past. I mean, even Paul says, forgetting what lies behind. I press forward, let's move on, man. Now, let me ask you, how much do you think that injured person hears mattering in those statements? I want the hurtful spouse to say, what is it that you need? You can be angry at me as long as you need, given how I hurt you. I hear the hurt. I can't believe you're working so hard to try to forgive me. Gosh, I'm lucky you're talking to me. Now, guess what that does? That humility, that brokenness, that vulnerability in the face of the injury that you've given this person. And here's where it gets cool. And here's what's sort of the secret to healing a wounded relationship. Remember the injustice gap where they're up here and you're down here? As the injurer speaks to them in humility about how they have hurt them, what they're doing is they acknowledge the hurt as they engage and hear the way they have wounded you. They're lowering themselves in humility. And as injurers do that, they are closing the injustice gap. I'm not up here and you down here anymore. I'm lowering myself to the place of someone who is wounded too. Wounded by the way I hurt you. You're broken because of my injury. I'm broken of how injurious it is to my heart that I hurt you. And that closes the injustice gap. And that's why repentance is healing. Get it? Because of this, I've seen relationships with repentant people actually get deeper and richer because of an injury, after an injury, if it's handled well. So that being heard closes the injustice gap and restores the mattering. Because not mattering, the feeling of not mattering, is one of the biggest obstacles to forgiveness. Got it? High five. Cool healing stuff. Let's talk about what happens when it doesn't go so cool. All right? Usually forgiveness is a lot more stupid, complicated than this, not lovely like this story. So let's create some categories for how forgiveness can go and some caveats there. We just talked about mattering. The next one is, I want to talk about the distinction between forgiveness and permissiveness. I see a lot of people who feel guilty that they're not being more forgiving, but it turns out the injury's still happening. The perp's still doing it. So I'm talking to this client about, she's talking about her husband and he's mean and blah, blah, blah. And I'm like, wow, that sounds terrible. When's the last time it happened? She's like, I can't forgive him. I keep trying to forgive him. I'm like, when's the last time it happened? She goes, this morning. And I'm like, what? All right, boys and girls, basic principle. Forgiveness is, by definition, about an injury that's taken place in the past. Okay? And a lot of people feel like they have to be forgiving to this person who is currently and continuing to hurt them. And pardon me, but that's just kooky. Okay? You can't forgive something that's still happening. My friend gossips about me all the time, but I know I should forgive them. What? I think this is missing the first step. Hear me. It is, by definition, impossible to forgive an ongoing action. All right? It's not past yet. Forgiveness is for past injuries. To do so is not called forgiveness. It's called permissiveness. Thank you, sir. May I have another? Okay? So sometimes, before we can even enter the playing field of forgiveness, we have to first stop the injuring. In other words, the first thing that needs to happen to their behavior is it needs to become a past behavior, if you get my drift. All right? So before we talk about forgiveness, we need to talk about limit setting on difficult people, which we just did. High five, okay? Good, move on. So she's constantly going off on you if you displease her. Don't worry about forgiveness yet. Use the difficult people Jedi tactics and engage some limits on that, all right? Is he still using porn? Don't rush to forgiveness. Let's look into it. Are you sure? Is there accountability? Is there a new history? Now, once they stop, you have a forgiveness issue. Get it? So you have to stop a behavior before you can forgive it. Real scientific stuff here. Law of life, though, all right? To do otherwise is impossible. This is hard enough as it is without trying to do something that's impossible, right? All right, thirdly, forgiveness versus a choice. This one is very important. So you want to forgive, right? Good for you. How? Well, a super important distinction is to remember that forgiveness is not a choice, it is a process. Our Christian culture does some kooky things with our spiritual lives and our choices and our struggles. And that is our Christian culture often turn spiritual struggles, heart issues, sin, into these kind of hard-edged choices, like choose to obey. I don't know if any of you guys ever have trouble with that. Instead of recognizing the plan analogies in Scripture of abiding and growth and Luke 4, fertilize it and give it another year and producing fruit and that aorist tense in the Greek that the apostles write in, that tense of the verb in Greek that implies an action that begins and then is ongoing and continuing. Begin the process of putting away the deeds of the flesh. It's this processional continuance tense of the verb. And it's also plural, by the way. Y'all be in the process of putting away the deeds. There's your body of Christ right there, okay? Instead, we make obedience this kind of static choice, like do or do not. I call this Yoda obedience, like do or do not. There is no try. Sorry, Master Yoda, there is a try, okay? If you see forgiveness as a choice like that, you're going to get jackknifed, man. The truth is this. Forgiveness is much more of a psychological, emotional process like grief than anything else. I mean, it's more like grief than like paying your taxes. I mean, nobody likes to forgive, and nobody likes paying your taxes. But if you want to pay your taxes, you finally just sit down and write the check and send it, okay? But you cannot come home from the funeral home and sit down and grieve the loss of your loved one, all right? Just get it done. Instead, what happens is you come home from the funeral home and you begin a painful journey that's a season and a process, all right? And with forgiveness, you can't make yourself be forgiving today any more than you could make yourself grieve a loss today. All right? It's a journey. If we miss that, we'll be gritting our teeth. We'll feel like failures at not forgiving this person who hurt me. We'll be stuck. It's a process. It's a growth, line of growth. All right? To do otherwise gives us a couple of different options. One is you try and grit your teeth, and I'm going to forgive them, and I'm going to forgive them, but that bitterness keeps seeping in, and now again, I'm feeling guilty for not forgiving the guilty party. What? Okay? Or we do the superficial kind of forgiving. It's nothing, I forgive you. Or I love this one. I forgive you as a Christian. Okay, that won't make, that's some snuggles right there, okay? But you're never going to sit by them in church again, and you're going to have kind of reminding them and those little barbs, or maybe you'll just let your hatred of them fester inside as a mental illness, I don't know, whatever you do. You haven't resolved the real process of letting it go, okay? Which leads to the next distinction, forgiveness versus healing. One of the secrets to understanding problems with forgiveness is this, realizing that a sin against us does not create one issue, it creates two issues. It creates a sin we might need to forgive, and in that process, it's also creating an injury that I need to heal. And don't miss that distinction, okay? Most issues that involve forgiveness involve an injury that sometimes can be the dickens to heal. And this is the key in terms of repairing the relationship. Because a lot of times people who've been hurt by you will need to continue talking about the injury even if forgiveness has taken place. Okay? And the injurer's over there going, she keeps bringing it up. I thought she'd forgiven me. Why does she keep talking about it? And I'm like, well, I think she probably has forgiven you, but there's still an injury that might take lots of time to actually heal. Those are separate issues. Bottom line, continuing to struggle over the injury is not necessarily unforgiveness. Okay? I mean, if you run over my foot with your car, I may forgive you. I'm a bad driver too, man. But I'm going to need surgery, and I'm going to need physical therapy, and I'm going to be walking with a cane, and I'm limping. And if you're a jerk, you're going to say, why do I keep having to drive you to PT? I thought you forgave me. You see the moron factor here? Okay. I did forgive you. I'm just trying to learn to walk again, bozo. Okay, so if you're the injured party or the injurer, make this distinction, okay? Forgiveness. Do I want to punish you? Do I want to even Steven? Do I want to get revenge? Do I want to, you owe me this debt? And healing the injury. What do I do with the way in which this hurt me? Don't confuse them. And by the way, if you're the injurer, and you're, tired of hearing them talking about this injury you gave them, this gives you something you can do. Okay? As we just said a minute ago about the injustice gap and the mattering, to the degree that the injurer can actually engage the injured with mattering and caring and understanding and hearing and affection, that's the medicine they need. You can actually help them be healing that injustice gap. You got a lot of power there, all right? Which leads us to another distinction, forgiveness versus getting free. This has application to unrepentant people, all right? So far, most of what we're talking about has been repentant people. But one thing that can help us make sense of forgiveness, especially with unrepentance, is to realize that forgiveness is not necessarily a kind of you should forgive kind of an issue. Like we turn it into this thing that you're supposed to do, or maybe something that you're doing for that other person. Like, you need to forgive them, like it's a gift or something. And I guess it is. But in most cases, especially with an unrepentant person or somebody who's dead and you can't have it out with them, I believe it's in our best interest to forgive them. Why? Because it makes us free. Let me tell you what I mean. Think about how you live with somebody who has hurt you and you hold a grudge against. Somebody who has harmed you, but they're unrepentant. They don't care. They're not thinking about you. It's never crossing their mind. They're not thinking about it at all. They're jerks, all right? But what do? We obsess about them. We fantasize about what I really want to say to that person. We can't sleep. We walk to Sunday school down a different hall so we don't have to see them. In other words, they fill our hearts. Think about it. The unforgiver, if you're not careful, can kind of become slave to the perp, slave to the villain. And if we don't metabolize what they did to us, they own us. And they own the part of us that they hurt. Okay? So forgiveness in this context, especially with unrepentant people, is about taking that back. All right? In other words, this kind of forgiveness doesn't really erase the debt, forgiveness per se. I mean, they haven't asked for that, right? They don't care. They're not asking for forgiveness. But it erases the degree to which that debt defines me, and that gets you back. This is for you. This is about you getting free of that injury. I was working with a guy once, and he was in a bit of a scandal at his church, and the senior pastor started gossiping about him around the church. And it was humiliating to him, and it was so hurtful to him, and the pastor refused to talk to him and acted like he didn't care. And it was just really destructive for this guy. And it just consumed him. And he would come into session talking about how much he hated this pastor. And rah, 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 rah. So he and I had to make sense of what do you do with that kind of injury when this person is not going to help you restore it. We had to start asking some questions about what do you need in your heart to divorce yourself from this injury and what it costs you. In other words, this kind of forgiveness is, you hurt me, but I'm not going to live orbiting my life around it. I'm no longer going to live in a position of holding this against you. This kind of forgiveness is about taking care of me, okay? And ultimately protecting them from taking more from us, by us living the rest of our lives being defined by what they did to us 10 years ago, okay? And technically, this isn't even forgiveness that we're talking about here, because they haven't asked for a debt to be removed. This is about you getting free. And we can talk about this more in Q&A if you want, but that involves a lot of ingredients. I think it involves things like a sense of individuation. In other words, who am I apart from this person and what they said? This person says I'm this horrible person and tells people that. Am I going to give that power? Can I be me? Can you be you? Remember the sense of identity. How much am I going to let your opinion of me define me? It involves grieving. Don't get me started on grieving unless you want to in Q&A. There's a podcast on grieving too, on sadness. It's recorded in my closet as well. Unfortunately, this one actually sounds like it's recorded in my closet. I talked to somebody, where's my phone? I talked to somebody in Greenville, South Carolina last month. He goes, I was just wondering, did you record sadness by going like this in your phone? Like, you know, almost. Anyway, sadness, grieving. The dynamic of moving from a place of protest and anger and victimhood and rage to the sorrow that somehow has this weird effect. Some of y'all have heard me speak on sadness before. Sadness is a transitional emotion. It's a progressive emotion. It takes us in places where we are in a lot of pain and moves us to places where there is resolution. And lastly, good people. Other people in our lives who are giving us goodies. Like, this person's a jerk and hurts me, but I have you feeding me, all right? Next one, we'll wrap this up in a second. Forgiveness versus reconciliation. Short answer, they're not the same. Forgiving someone does not necessarily mean that you move back to relating to them according to the same ways and the same principles that you did before. It can, but it doesn't necessarily mean that, okay? I mean, so far, what we've been talking about, forgiveness, is about you and your heart and your choices and your process. But the moment you start talking about reconciliation, how you're going to live that process out with another person, you lose a lot of power here because you have to deal with their choices. They could not care about reconciling. They don't want to resolve this with you. They don't care. Or maybe they're not safe. Maybe they're a repeat offender. I'm going to be really careful about that, okay? I'm going to forgive you, but if you're a repeat offender, I'm going to love you and forgive you through one of those glass walls in the prison where you talk on the phone, you know, to each other like that. That's how we're going to relate. In other words, these aren't forgiveness questions anymore. These are wisdom questions. And we have to make them based on other people's choices. As we said, love keeps no record of wrongs, but sometimes wisdom must, okay? So reconciliation is different from forgiveness. I love how Paul even says it in Romans 12. He says, as it is possible, live at peace with all men. I'm like, thanks, Paul. You know, he's like, look, I get it. You know, people are like, ugh, right? You know, they threw me in prison and everything. But as it's possible, you know, try to, you know, live at peace with all men. Okay. So here's where I'm going with this. Forgiveness and reconciliation, it's legitimate to potentially relate differently to somebody even after you've forgiven them, okay? We let go of the I'm good, you're bad, you owe me a debt, whatever like that, but we might relate to them differently. There's still consequences. I mean, think about God. God doesn't take away the consequences. He may forgive you, but the consequences stay. If you kill somebody, they're still dead, okay? So we work toward forgiveness. Reconciliation, we have some limits. I had a guy who I started my practice with 36 years ago, and he basically just screwed me over after a year and left, and it was terrible. My brother had just died, and like all these awful things, and I was all of a sudden alone in this practice, you know, a year of therapy. You don't know what you're doing, and I hated him, like for 2 years. And I started thinking, like, gee, this has taken a lot from me. He's never talked to me again. And I'm like, yeah, but I'm orbiting around his injury. I don't want this. So I need to engage this. A, I know I don't want to be imprisoned by his injury. B, I get it. I hurt and betray people too. And so I decided I wanted to forgive him. And so I called him up and I said, next time you're down this way, I want to get together and have dinner. And so we did. And so I met with him and I said, dude, the whole thing about our breakup, I hated your guts for a couple of years, but I really worked. I want to let you know I forgive you that. And I really sort of want that to be clean. And he said, okay. You want to order dessert? And I'm like, actually, no. In other words, I forgave him, but he basically slammed the door on me toward reconciliation. There was no repentance from him. There was no engagement from him. Forgiveness was there, but I can't have a relationship with him. He made that impossible, as it is possible. By the way, this is often what's happening when you'll have people sort of demanding, like, why haven't you forgiven me? What they're actually saying is, why have you started relating to me differently since this injury? How dare you? What they're really saying is not, why don't you forgive me, but they're saying, I don't want you to still have the effects and the consequences of how I related you to still affect me. Like, make them go away, okay? Which is ironic that they would act that way, because by acting that way, they are, by definition, proving to you that they have not changed at all, and they're still an unrepentant jerk. So it's good that you're keeping your distance, all right? The repentant person would understand. They'd go, look, let me help you. I totally understand that you would need to change how you relate to me. I hurt you. All right, so make that distinction. All right, one last one, and we'll do questions. Just briefly, the dynamic of forgiveness versus trust. This relates to the dynamic of reconciliation. Here's the little piece I just want to throw out here, and we can talk more if you want. One of the things that I hear a lot from someone who's been injured is, I just don't know if I can trust them anymore, okay? And that's legit. I mean, one of the things that gets broken if we're sinned against is our ability to live with sort of a sense of confidence, that I can live trusting this person is not going to come and hurt me again. And that obviously needs to be earned back with a season, a new history of different behavior. And the injured person needs to literally experience things being better. So there's the issue of rebuilding trust. I get that. But the reason I'm talking about this is because I've dealt with so many people who that's where they stop. In other words, if I'm just building trust because I'm waiting to see what you're going to do, then I'm left in this kind of a waiting position, kind of a passive position, kind of a victim position, kind of wondering, like, are they trustworthy yet? How about now? I'm not sure. Maybe later. And they're never really sure. When do you know? Which is why I think the following distinction is important, and that is that trust has two sides. Certainly, there's the issue of, can I trust you? Show me. New style of behavior. But the other piece, and this is where I want to give you wounded people power, do I trust me, is the other side of trust. And that is not just, can I trust you that you won't hurt me, but how much can I develop a sense of trust in me that I am strong enough and I am wise enough and I have resources enough to where even if you do hurt me, I can act powerfully and I can protect myself and I can set limits and I have strong community and I have people surrounding me. And one thing I know I can trust is that I will be in a good place regardless whatever happens with this. That is something that gets you out of that waiting, vulnerable position. And you can be literally working there, growing in your own network of people in your own heart to trust yourself. All right? Huge piece of reconciliation. All right. Those are some verses of forgiveness. Let's do questions. Again, questions on anything about marriage from that conference, this conference, issues today, whatever. Let's go. And I'll check my phone. All right, let me answer this question, and then we'll go to you. This is interesting. A tip for how to intervene when a spouse is engaging in an unhealthy behavior with a child. Parent A is yelling, shaming. Parent B says that's inappropriate behavior. Then fireworks ensue. All right, so what do you do with that? That's a great question. And I think I would roll it into the difficult people talk. Because what you're talking about is somebody who is being chronically hurtful and is unrepentant about it, apparently, if fireworks are ensuing. And the primary question would be, what I would do with you if you asked me that question privately is I would move the context of the question, the answer to that question, out of the context of the parenting arena and put it in the arena of your relationship with them, period. Because I bet you $1.280 that the parenting dynamic is not the only place that they act this way. In other words, they have a theme of being shamey or scoldy or hurtful, and that anger reactive style is their go-to, and that's a theme, all right? Now, if they're unrepentant, master that first talk. I want you to say, you realize, mirror, you continue to be hurtful and shaming to the children. And they say, how dare you say that? And the fireworks ensue. And you go, wow, whenever I try to talk to you about this, you get more escalated. I'm not willing to interact with you if you're going to continue to escalate, if you're not open to hearing anything from me about how you relate to me and the children. And you know what else? And I'm going to break one of the urban legends here. To the degree that you go off on the children in a shaming, hurtful way, you're going to have to go through me. One of the urban legends in like pop psychology is never fight in front of their children. Well, that doesn't mean you can't protect your children. And if that person is unwilling in a repentant way, off scene, to talk about and address how we parent together, and you have a parent who is chronically hurtful, I want those children to see a model that somebody can stand up to the bully. What you see otherwise, if you have a bully parent and the other parent is kind of shucking and jiving, trying to figure out how to manage it, nobody's alphaing this person. And these people go, well, I don't want the children to see me have to throw down on them. And I'm like, why not? I want the children to see it's possible to push back on somebody who's that hurtful. All right, now the moment that person becomes humble, drop your weapons and restore, and y'all parent unilaterally. But with an unrepentant person who's being hurtful in the family and to the children, I am in favor of you setting limits on them. Now notice, I didn't get into a fight in front of them. I didn't get into a yelling match in front of them. I didn't get into a name-calling fest in front of them. That's what they mean when they say don't fight in front of the children. Oh, no, you said this. No, I didn't. Don't do that. But you can certainly be difficult people, aggressive, and limit setting in a powerful way to contain them. Lock and load, all right? Because in doing that, not only are you addressing a pattern with you and the spouse, you are modeling for the children that we do not have to be at the mercy of this person, because I guarantee the children are more afraid of that person than you are, okay? And we are showing them we don't make deals with terrorists, okay? You had the question?
Yeah. It's pretty deep. Well, we'll talk about it later too, but just briefly, in particular forgiveness, I think you ought to write a book on forgiveness, first of all. Second of all, protecting other people. Somebody has hurt you, they're a threat to other people. Yeah, you got any thoughts?
Are you responsible for this hurtful person?
I'm a pastor. So sort of.
Are the other people that person is hurting coming to you for advice?
Yes, in the past, yes. Yeah, it's a complicated situation, but yeah. I just want to know what the responsibility is when you've got somebody that's hurt that you don't. I mean, your last couple points there, you got to get free of them. You got for your own sake, but like, it's a little bit like the last question, protecting children. What is my responsibility to protecting other people who might come in? You know, they might catch the fire.
I'll take a shot at it. I'm not sure this is going to be a great answer, but let's call it a rough draft. We can tighten it up at dinner or something. a Matthew 18 church discipline intervention with the person who's hurtful. I mean, you are in an authority role who can actually intervene with some real gravity in terms of this style. And I think engaging that yourself or elders or people sort of addressing that person. Now, a lot of times, as I said, the spouse is the only person who really has that power. They'll blow off churches or they'll change churches or whatever like that. But the other side of that would be, I would be, holster ready for engaging any of the people who they have been hurtful to. And in essence, giving them pastoral permission to go listen to the difficult people talk and learn to be a Jedi in terms of setting limits on this person, because I can't be looking around at all the potential victims of this person, and that's way too big a job for you, and you can't do it. It's impossible. And it's partly their responsibility to make some of those choices and stewardships themselves. So to whatever degree you have influence of this person, I would think that a church discipline and intervention and engagement of like, dude, this keeps happening and this is a problem, would be an important step. And secondly, it really do people good. One of the things I like about the difficult people talk is I think we Christians need permission to not just learn about being loving, but learn about being powerful. We just don't do that in our church much. And so to have kind of pastoral permission of, hey, no, it's cool to throw down and be powerful in a godly way, and then we welcome them back when their hearts break. I think you being a resource in that sense would be cool. Okay.
Good morning, John.
Good morning.
It's our second conference, so I thought we will be all experts by now, but we still.
I thought y'all would be too.
I know. And then I listen to you on podcast, and I thought I got everything, and then I go home, and something triggers me, and everything just lost again. So I don't know how.
Right. Well, I do the podcast, and I go home, and something triggers me, and I break.
Right.
So I know the vibe. Yeah.
And then I would like to meet your wife Norma too, to see how she's going to tell us about your marriage.
Oh yeah.
Because I hear about her all
Yeah.
the time. I would like to see how she looks like and what she's going to tell about you.
That would be very interesting. And oftentimes when she's come to conferences, she'll sit on the front row and is the peanut gallery. It'll be like, yeah, he says that, and I'm like, Norma, come on.
So here's my question. You didn't talk too much at this conference, but it was, I think, on podcast or one of your recordings. It's about one of the eye intimacy. Because what I've learned in my marriage that men and women, or maybe just in our marriage, we define intimacy in different ways. Mm-hmm. Okay, so how do we get through that? Like, can you explain to my husband what intimacy is? and then explain to me, and then could you tell us how to feel both intimate as a wife and a man?
Yeah, good. My 1 o'clock's open today, so dude, like wherever, buy me a beer and we'll work it out, okay? All right, well, remember, a real linchpin for me about the intimacy topic is, where I start every time, and that is, are y'all repentant or unrepentant? In other words, I'm looking at a couple and they're saying, yeah, we both want to resolve the intimacy thing. If they're in that place, then it's a lot easier. If one of them's like, got their arms crossed, like, I don't want to be close to you and I'm sick of you, that's a different story, all right? And more of a difficult people story and more of a grieving story. But let's assume that you're both interested. Remember that the subtitle of the intimacy section was 2 things. And one of the things that I think that a lot of people miss when they talk about intimacy, when they do marriage conference on intimacy is, what intimacy is you should just be sharing your heart. That those 4 levels, drive-through, news, sports, and weather, TCB, and abiding. Remember the 4 levels? Well, a lot of times what you hear at a marriage conference is y'all need to go kind of knee to knee and nose to nose and share your hearts together and live at that level 4 abiding place all the time. And that's cool. That is what we call let you in. Can intimacy be something about letting someone else in, okay? But if I'm working with a couple, what usually happens is one of you is really good at letting somebody in. I want more closeness. The other one is maybe needs to learn more about, can I keep you in? In other words, yeah, I want to be developing more closeness, but one of my questions I want to ask with a couple who are working on intimacy is to the person who's longing for more intimacy, I want some responsibility and ownership of what do I do with intimacy when I get it? Do I hold on to it? Does it hold inside? Do I keep it and nurture it? Do I see that what that person did share actually was for them a real openness? Can I take that as a form of real connection? And a lot of times people who want more intimacy can feel to their spouse like whatever their spouse is given isn't enough and they need to give more, and that actually makes them withdraw some. So one of the things I want to look at with intimacy is how good is one person at letting you in and sharing your heart? How good is the other person at keeping you in and holding on to intimacy even if we're not like real super connected right now and holding on to that? Now, if the can't let you in person wants to grow there, in other words, they're like, wow, I actually do want to get better at being able to share my heart and all of that. I think that's a skill you can learn. And again, we go to body of Christ people. I want to have my safe people, and I want to be talking to them about my life. I'm like, look, my wife says they're not really getting my heart, and I feel like there is something missing. Help me out. And if one of you, I don't know which one of y'all is the one who's wanting more connection, though I can guess. If you say I want more connection there, another person, another group, some people with other eyes and ears and hearts can kind of go, yeah, dude. I mean, a lot of times it's like, when your kid was in the hospital, you were kind of like, yeah, it's going to be okay, Lord's will and all that. But I could tell your heart was breaking. Like, where's that? And you start getting more curious about what's going on inside yourself. Like if she's growing in her ability to hold on to connection, we can also grow in our ability to be more emotionally connected and learn about those things. A lot of times what happens is if we don't grow up with the software of actually being able to say, what is that feeling? There's a real learning curve to develop it. So if you're both open to that, there's a cool direction of growth, but for both of y'all. It wouldn't be for one person to change. It'd be for both of y'all to grow in the can I let you in and can I keep you in dimensions together. And that way, neither one of you is the bad guy. Both of you are growing together with what you do with intimacy, which makes it a lot more possible and harmonious. Keeps it from becoming so conflictual.
Hey, John Cox over here.
Yeah, Davis.
All right, yeah. Hey, guys, listen up. I've said this to Margaret, maybe it's wrong, I don't know. I'm sorry, please forgive me. I was only thinking of myself.
That sounds like something you would do. Sorry, go ahead.
And then also, how about, you've never mentioned forgetting. Forgetting, because it's so difficult. Mm-hmm. You never said that word at all.
Yeah, I used the word healing instead, because we don't forget. I mean, I'll never forget. I walked in this building yesterday, and I remembered y'all. I remember. But if somebody injures me, I'm still going to remember it. The dynamic is not forgetting it. The dynamic is healing it. So I think if I were to tweak that phrase, forgive and forget, I would call it forgive and heal. Because you're not going to forget. I mean, it's like, we're told that God forgets our iniquities again. He didn't forget. He moves them as far as the east is from the west. He didn't forget. He just remembers them no more against us. And that's kind of what the Bible means by that. But I think maybe a cleaner way to say it would be to forgive and heal. And that way, when I do remember it, am I even smart about it? Am I even hurt? And I might even say one of the things that's really cool in a relationship, once you kind of get used to the fact that you're both going to be hurtful, and those hurts might have some lasting consequences, I want a spouse to be able to come back 2 years later and go, hey, can you just be with me? I was watching a show, and something happened on that show, and it kind of reminded me of that bad time we went through a few years ago. Will you just be close to me? And they're bringing it back up, but in a healing way. Not in a like, I'm still mad at you, but it's a healing thing. They remember it, but in a healing way. What was your question about the first part, though, of what you said to Margaret?
Oh, when to Margaret, I'll say, I'm sorry, please forgive me. I was only thinking of myself.
Yeah? You want me to give that a thumbs up or thumbs down? Or?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I'll tell you my vibe on it. I think the coolest way to respond to somebody if we've hurt them, I mean, our default, and this is cultural, our default is if I've hurt you and I want us to repair it, it's a sweet thing to say. I'm sorry, will you forgive me? I know I hurt you, whatever like that. Try this on. What about asking them what they need? I mean, we assume they need us to apologize. We assume they need us to ask forgiveness, do they? If you've hurt me, I'm really not interested in you telling me that you're sorry. I don't really want to talk about your feelings right now. Great, you're sorry. I want to talk about mine. And if you said, I really hurt you, what do you need? I would say, thank you for asking. I need you to get it. I need you to try it on. I need you to understand. Remember in the conflict talk in the last conference, we talked about what is it that heals an injury? What heals an injury is being gotten. And a phrase I used in that conference goes something like this, that the experience of being gotten and seen and understood in our injury is so close to the feeling of being loved that they're almost indistinguishable. So to repair an injury, I ought to add this to this talk. I'll call it the Davis Addendum. The way to heal an injury when we've caused it might involve asking them what they need, like that question last night. How can I give to you? Because I really hurt you and I can see that. What do you need? And they may say, I need some space for a while. Good. This isn't about my need to make it all better. You know, a lot of times people who are jumping to apologies are like, okay, let's just get this behind us and I'm sorry, will you forgive me and all that. And we got to work at their pace if we've hurt them. And I want to say, what do you need? And I would tell you, I need you to get it. I need you to try it on. And you're going to say, it felt to you like I did this and this and that, and that was almost like I was saying this and this and that to you. And what you'll hear me say is your prize at the end of the rainbow. You'll hear me go, yes. And you know you got them. Yes. You get it, okay? That's healing happening right there. I am going to add this to this talk. That's good. That getting it is better than any apology or any please forgive me or whatever like that, in my opinion. I'm open to discussion about it, but I think I'm right.
Oh, and one last thing. If you ever think of franchising, John Miller, Rick Adams, and I have talked about it. We'll buy your first franchise. We've already got a tagline.
What, a franchise like pop-up units around the country? Okay. You got it, man. You got it.
Need to detox? Think of John Cox.
One call does it all, right? All right. Question? Yes, ma'am.
How do you prevent situations where forgiveness then turns into baggage? Because I feel like so often personally, there are times where you don't get free from it, or you do get free, you go through the process of forgiveness and all of these things, but then it leaves you with new baggage from the situation.
Would you be willing, and you don't have to because it's public, would you be willing to talk about like what kind of baggage that would look like? Like give me an example
Just
of that
fears
baggage.
that something's going to happen again, or distrust, or
With that person or in general?
I think the baggage would be then in general, where, oh, that situation, and it doesn't necessarily have to be a situation from a relationship, but a situation outside the relationship then turns into baggage that affects the relationship. So if you have a situation where you have a distrustful situation that needs forgiveness outside the relationship, whether at work or with a friend, you find forgiveness for that, but then you have an example of baggage, of distrust that then impacts the relationship.
And impacts other relationships.
Yeah.
That's very interesting. Let's see. All right.
I've been stumped by it too, so.
What?
I too have been stumped by it, so it takes some.
Oh, I'm not stumped by it anymore. It took me a minute. Okay. Here's the deal. Sound like Joe Biden, didn't it? Okay, folks, here's the deal. If I have an experience in my adult relationships that affects me, it's going to affect me, okay? And I may need to go through a process of healing or restoration, okay? But if I feel it generalizing, if I feel like it becoming more principial in a broader theme in my life, I think that's a tell that this injury, this question is not just activating something based on this adult person affecting me in this adult relationship. I think that if we feel an injury in a current relationship start to generalize and make us afraid in general, I would want to look at your core questions. In other words, what just happened was, see, look, I saw the way, okay, let's go back to you were here last night?
Yes.
And I was talking about how, my own shame issues and whether people like me or not. I go back to, I saw the way that person looked at me. I could tell they were judging me. All right, now that's not about them. I'm projecting that. That's me. All right, so here's this person that I trusted and they betrayed. Oh, people betray you. Now, I want to at least get curious as to, okay, what did I learn little square level about betrayal? Because if it's generalizing out that widely, it's probably a core question answer. And that actually is, remember Marshall's great question last night about how do you learn, kind of follow in the breadcrumbs of these issues to like what might be underneath. That'd be a great little hint, detective clue to go, I think I have an issue about my vibe of trust being something that can feel a little tenuous. Because something in me has an ear to hear betrayal pretty quickly. All right, so I need to be thinking about how to help grow there and heal that and bring that to new relationships and grow there, okay? Now, specifically to your question, I would want to go to John's part 2 about trust and say, this person did X, Y, Z, and it affects now how much I can trust, right? That is that kind of trust you. So if like you and I were working on this issue, I would say, okay, let's play with the dynamic of what you do with power. Let's play with the dynamic of trusting you. Let's play with the dynamic of who you are, even if they do hurt you again. Let's don't sell you out on the auction block of I'm at the mercy of what the mean people might do. There's like more to you than that. Let's find that and give you that gravity, and then you're in possession of your safety, not these other people. Yeah. Yes, Jess?
Okay, so thinking less about like big H hurt, like some kind of chronic behavior or like a big thing that happened in the past that needs to be forgiven, but more like little H hurt of like, you did something earlier today and we're now fighting about it, and it's not necessarily emblematic of something bigger going on. Mm-hmm. But in our particular relational dynamic, we both want reconciliation quickly, which means sometimes one or both of us will end up like, we'll just do the whole thing real fast, like kind of quick and dirty, like, yeah, I know, I hear you, I'm sorry, mm-hmm. I forgive you, let's just move on with our day. But then like hours later, it's like, well, no, hang on a second, like that actually hurt me deeper than I thought, or something about that interaction really bothers me, and we didn't really cover it. I guess what advice or counsel would you have towards, like, is it necessary to slow that process down? Is it okay to kind of keep revisiting? How would you navigate that kind of situation?
Okay, well, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
All right, when y'all do swing back for that second go round, does that go okay?
It kind of depends. Like sometimes I think the second go around will manifest because one of us is realizing these things and then gets really moody and kind of pissy about it. Mm-hmm. And then the other person's like, I thought we had this conversation earlier and I thought we were okay, but it seems like you're really not okay right now. And then we kind of like do it again. Mm-hmm.
But does that go okay?
It does. Yeah, it does, like by the end. Yeah, good. So, yeah. I guess what I'm asking is like...
Well, that's good. I mean, even in baseball, you get 3 strikes, so you're just using 2 of them. You're doing pretty good. Okay?
Great, yeah.
But you're asking, I interrupted you.
No, I think we might be answering my question while we're talking. Yeah, like it's okay to kind of like revisit as long as like healthy communication is happening, right? Or would you?
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not framing my question great.
No, you're doing
but-
a great job. But the other question, I mean, what you said earlier is even more interesting to me.
Yeah.
And that is, your third interaction about it. Have the interaction, quickie solution. Second interaction, we actually didn't solve it completely. We need to revisit it. Third interaction, date night. What is it you think that makes us both rush to try to fix things so quick? Like, why are we so afraid of conflict and the little breaches between us? And it's like, I would love to get curious on that.
Yeah.
Like, over a glass of wine. That'd
Yeah.
be fun. You know? I mean, like, oh, I know exactly why I do it. It's like, okay, the can I keep you in part, it's like when I see that look on your face, I go into this, like, I remember, like, in some of my earlier days, Norma would get real quiet. And I would do the, don't ever do this. Is everything okay? Like, don't do that. Especially if they're difficult people, never ask them that. But I'd be like, are you okay? In other words, little boy me is like, I'm scared mommy's upset. Are you okay? And I'm like, what's that about? Can I not keep you in? I want to get curious about those kind of parts. So something in us has some kind of fear of conflict. Let's learn that together and kind of conquer it. That'd be kind of cool. And you'd be able to hit more of it earlier on, prolong it a little more, take your time more with it, even call some timeouts and go, okay, I think that's all I got right now. Let me think about it a little bit more. But this relates to keep you in.
You're going to pay for that date night, right? That's what you're volunteering.
Yeah, sure. I contribute to RUF all the time. However you want to use it, dude, that's your call. I think a really kind of fun, cool game for a couple to play, if they're feeling relatively grounded, is how comfortable can I be with you and I being in a conflictual, yucky place and me be kind of zen that it's going to end good? Isn't that an interesting yoga pose emotionally? I'm going to sit with the tension of, I know you're mad at me. I always tease men because we're so scared of our women. Our wives go, I'm mad at you. And we're like, what? I didn't do anything. It's like, I was seeing this couple. This guy's like a zillionaire CEO. He has jets and stuff. And his wife's like, what you said made me sad. And he's like, what? I'm like, dude, I think you're, Anyway. I think it's so interesting how scared we are of our wives' feelings. It's very interesting. But as a couple, how much can I sit with the tension of, you're like really ticked at me right now, and I can rest and kind of know and keep you in and be grounded in that. That'd be a cool kind of growing edge.
Let's see if I can frame this in a clear way. Is our little square always our 5-year-old hurt self, or is it also, or instead, like the sinful parts of us?
Sinful parts of
The
us?
sinful parts of us. Because, does it always come from a unmet need, or is it just that we're always seeking, like, that perfect relationship that we only have with God?
That's a super cool question.
I-
And one of the most important questions in my life. So I'm going to keep y'all to 1:30 and answer it. I had this question always as a Christian in psychology. What's the relationship between sin and psychopathology? In other words, you see somebody who's got rage issues, but that's sinful, right? That's bad. But you find out that underneath that, they're so wounded and they're so hurting, and you help heal that wound and that hurt, and the sin stops. They stop being so mean. Wait, we did emotional work in their growth and they stopped being sinful? What's up with that? I've asked that question always. I'm going to give you the little 5-minute version of the summary of sort of the conclusion I've come to it. And it is this. I'm going to draw. Let's see. Let's go to our bottom of the U circle. All right. Here's life. And life has a lot of problems and difficulties, and sin contributes to those. And there are challenges in life about love and about being hurt and about being close and about having a sense of me and about being powerful and about being creative and all of these challenges that life has. And God created us to develop a heart and an image that's like His. And I'm just going to make 4 little food groups down here. He created us to need to understand how to do intimacy and be close to other people in order to deal with the world that requires that in a relationship with Him. I think Adam and Eve would have still had to learn a lot of things about intimacy and connection in the garden. There's more to learn. They would have had to learn about identity and stewardship and making choices. Adam named animals. He had to learn this ability in order to deal with life. I don't think they would have had to deal with imperfection because, they would have had to deal with managing their emotional world and their impulses, which they obviously did poorly. So we've got this force pushing against us that I've got to make sense of. How do I deal with real life with real people? All right? Now, everything blew up because now there's a new force. And it is a force of evil and cruelty and darkness and something in us that sin makes. And you can understand our sin nature a lot if you think about like the second law of thermodynamics. The universe is fallen, and if all you got to do to kill your car is to do nothing, all you got to do to ruin your house is to do nothing. Why is it easier to gain weight than it is to lose weight? Why is it easier to spend money than it is to make money? The world flows downhill because it's fallen. And one of the ways to understand our sin nature is there's something in us that tends to go downhill. And it's our natural state. And if we let go of the steering wheel, we ride into the ditch because something in us, it just feels right. I would rather blame you than take responsibility. It feels better. I would rather lie to get out of trouble than to be honest. That's my nature. I feel it. I would rather hold on to my cruelty and my judgmentalness than be broken myself or forgive. It feels right. That is a really big problem. And all of the sinful deeds that we do are outworkings of that, okay? So here I am, trying to deal with real life, and all of a sudden, this giant weight of dark garbage is added to the list. Now, what am I going to use to push back on the giant weight of dark garbage? Well, gratefully, Christ is here, the Holy Spirit. God is at work in our hearts, and we're reborn, and we're alive inside, and there can be this thing that didn't used to exist. Remember when God says at Eden, I will put enmity between you and the woman, between your seed and her seed? I preached on this once here. That is this beautiful gift. He's saying, your relationship with all this garbage, I'm going to make you to a place where ultimately you won't be friends with it. You'll hate it. And ultimately, you'll get to a place where you can be like Romans 7. And you can say, the thing I wish I do not do. I do the very thing I hate. And so now you have a problem for the first time. Christians have a problem that non-Christians don't have. And that is what I do with all this sin stuff. Because, if we're left to our own devices, we like sinning. It's fun, all right? It'll kill us, but it's fun in the meantime, all right? So now we have 2 problems. I have to deal with real life. And what am I going to do with real life? Well, I have abilities and issues and skills and little part stuff that I have to bring to bear on that issue. And the same tool I can use to combat my sin. I want to feel superior and better than other people. Well, that would be this imperfection thing. But what if I got something that feels really gracious given to me, in a real context that being broken and humble feels loving? And what if my little square got the ability to really engage real connection with real people and be honest with them instead of needing to impress them? Or what about I am set in a situation where I want to be controlling and a jerk, but instead I learn about what real power and real stewardship looks like. And pretty soon I'm bringing, okay, and I want to blow up and scream and yell at you, but I was given good things about dealing with impulse control. And all of a sudden, my little part pieces, my little square, the question isn't, is it instead of sin? It's the world is a problem and relationships are hard and sin is making it harder. What tools do you have in your toolbox to deal with all of them? That's why therapy is like sanctification. That's why body of Christ is like sanctification. Because if you build more of these goodies, guess where you're going to use them? You're going to be at war with the flesh. You're going to be mortifying the deeds of the flesh. You're going to be becoming more and more of a spiritual gangster managing the sin world because you've got this groundedness in power or love or stewardship or forgiveness. And the more you grow here, the more you grow spiritually. Boom.
Well done.
Yeah. That's a great place to stop. I don't think I've ever explained that publicly before. That was cool. Huh? What's she saying? I can't hear. Oh, yeah, all the boxes are the same. Yeah. Picnic basket, lunchbox, pick your metaphor. Call me the metaphor man. All right. Guys, what can I say? This is the hardest conference I do. And yeah, this is like really how I work. This is what I do in the office, man. And you hung with me, and it's like awesome to do that with you. Thank you so much. I'm going to pray, and I get to be with y'all tomorrow in worship. Yes. Cannot wait. Let's pray. Father, we are humbled. We can't talk about the truth about ourselves without being humbled. And what a wondrous thing it is that the more humbled we are, the more we get you. The more we see our blind spots and our hurts, our emptiness, our incompleteness, the more of you we get, the more you welcome us. That is the best news in the whole world. And I pray that you would let us live with that news everywhere in our relationship with you and our relationship with our spouses. And wherever we are, that we would remember that your arms are bigger for us when we are smaller. We thank you that this is so. In the name of Christ who made that possible, we thank you. Amen.
Okay. Yeah, good. Get your children quickly.